Present.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Here.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
Here.
Commissioner Lucero,
Here.
Commissioner Morondo,
Here.
Commissioner Pava. I understand he's excused. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Lucero, will you lead the Pledge of Allegiance? Okay, we'll move to the approval of the agenda. Does some staff have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Chair Clow. Thank you.
Do any of the commissioners have any changes to the agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero,
Yes.
Commissioner Morondo.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Next, we'll move to the approval of the June 1, 2023 minutes. Does staff have any changes to the minutes?
No changes to the minutes.
Do any commissioners have any changes to the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero,
Yes.
Commissioner Morondo.
Yes.
The motion has, oh, and Commissioner Lawrence.
Yes.
Sorry, the motion has been approved.
Okay, and next we'll move to the approval of findings and conclusions in case number 2023-6483, which is 5101 Los Solanos Drive and 4822 Rail Runner Road Development Plan. Any staff have any changes to those findings and conclusions?
As Chair Clow, thank you, members of the commission. So we did amend the findings of fact for case 2023-6484, line 16A. And we updated the amended findings of fact on PrimeGov yesterday. And the new item A, 16A shall read, the applicant shall continue the construction of the La Rambla Trail from the northern end of the property line to the Los Solares Park with a compacted surface approved by the land use director. And that was just to clarify the intent of the Planning Commission.
Yes, as I understand, because the that compacted portion only applied from the end of the property line to the park.
Chair Clow, that is correct. Yeah.
With that clarification, does anyone on the commission have any changes? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Lucero,
Yes.
Commissioner Morondo,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
And then we'll move to matter 6, which is old business. It is case number 2023-6486, 3900 Constellation Drive Development Plan.
And Chair Clow.
I'm sorry, that one's postponed.
Yeah,
We'll move
this one.
first to the new business, which is case number 2023-6842 Windmill Hill at Las Placidas Compound Final Subdivision Plat. Staff?
Yes, Chair Cloud, thank you. Members of the commission, I'm going to bring up my presentation. Plugged it in. Like that one will work. Okay. We have a new adapter up here. Doesn't seem to work. Okay. Thank you, members of the commission. This is case 2023-6842. for final subdivision plat for 623.5 Garcia Street for a 3-lot subdivision. So as you know, subdivisions have to come for preliminary and final approval. The preliminary approval for this case was on April 6, 2023. So now the case is here before you for final approval. But not much substantive has changed from the preliminary to final, as you'll see. So in more detail, this case is called the Windmill Hill at Las Positas Compound Final Subdivision Plat. So it's brought here by Liaison Planning on behalf of Michael Bloom, requesting a final subdivision plat for 3 single-family residential lots on a 1.48 acre property. The property is located at 6231.5 Garcia Street. It's zoned R3, which is 3 residential or 3 dwelling units per acre. It is within the downtown and east side historic district and the River and Trail Archaeological Review District. The preliminary subdivision was approved on April 6th as part of case 2022-6201. So staff does recommend approval for this final subdivision, subject to conditions of approval and technical corrections as outlined in my report. One motion will be required for this case just to approve or deny the final subdivision. So for some more background, in 2012, this property came forward for a request for a 4-lot single-family subdivision, as well as a variance to the minimum street width. It was approved by the Planning Commission at that time for both the subdivision and the variance. However, the subdivision was never recorded and therefore it expired, I believe, after 3 years. And therefore, they have to come back for another approval. That case information can be found in attachment F. Now they also came for preliminary approval on April 6th, when they came for a 3-lot subdivision this time as part of case 2022-6201, as well as another variance for the minimum street width. Planning Commission again granted both those requests, and you can find those materials in your packet. So this is the property location off of Garcia Street, just southeast of downtown here. You're probably familiar with this area, and the access is off of a private easement, which doesn't have a street name, but you can see it coming through the through the neighborhood and then through this little easement here. Here's another view, just for some more context. You can see there's an existing home on the property as well as an existing windmill, hence the name Windmill Hill. And then the northern section of the property is what is going to be subdivided into 2 separate lots for the additional units. This is the proposed site plan for the project. As you can see, the access is here off of Garcia Street. Looks like they are calling this Las Placitas, the entrance through here. There's a little U and then down into the property. And then you can see a hammerhead access point here for fire and to get to the different lots. So as I said before, it's zoned R3, which it would actually allow for 4.4 acres per units per acre. So this is actually slightly less dense than it could be according to zoning, and it is within the downtown and east side historic district. So when the property comes for building permits, they will have to get historic approval for this for their property. The new homes. Yes, there's 1 existing home, 1 additional windmill, and then 2 additional lots. So the existing home will be on lot 1, which is 21,000 square feet approximately. Lot 2 will be 26,000 feet approximately, and then lot 3 will be 16,000 square feet. And as you can see, the road width is 20 feet, which was allowed by the variance that the Planning Commission granted at the preliminary approval hearing. And you can see it matches the existing access road profile. So just a few quick conditions of approval. The main reason why we do a preliminary and final is so that the applicant has time to review our changes and make any changes. In this case, the changes were very small. Most of those were addressed. However, there are a few that still need to be addressed or just clarified with the applicant to make sure that they will be addressed. The main one that we added to this final approval that wasn't in the preliminary is just that we want them to define the buildable area and required open space on the site plan itself, so that that's a little more defined moving forward. But otherwise, they met all the other conditions of approval. So that concludes my presentation. I'll stand for questions or hand it off to the applicant. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and hear from the applicant.
Thank you.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. State your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Dolores Vihil. I'm with Liaison Planning Services. My address is P O Box 1835, Santa Fe, New Mexico 87504. Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. As you know, my name, again, for the record, is Dolores Vihil. With Liaison Planning, I represent the applicants for this project. We fulfilled the conditions for the final plat approval and agree with the conditions and technical corrections for recording the plat. Also, those that need to be fulfilled prior to the building permit will be achieved. We appreciate the commissioner's decision back in April to approve the preliminary plat and request that you approve the final plat. And thank you for approving this. And if you have any questions, we're here to answer them. Mr. Doug McDowell is also here to answer any technical questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? So we'll open this matter up for public comment. Is anyone here from the public wishing to speak on this matter? If so, please come forward. Maggie, is there anyone on Zoom that wants to speak on this matter?
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Helen Rogers, and I live adjacent to Windmill Hill at 637 Garcia. And I'd just like to say that my husband and I are in great support of this project. We think that it'll be highly successful, and we appreciate all the work that everybody has done to make it come as far as it has so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for speaking in favor of the project. Doesn't happen often. Anyone else from the public would like to talk about this project? Anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Clout. I do not see anyone on Zoom with their hands raised. If anyone is on Zoom right now and would like to comment on the Windmill Hill final subdivision plat, please raise your hand. I do not see any hands raised right now on Zoom.
Okay, at this point then we'll close the public hearing and again, ask the commissioners if they have any comments or questions they'd like to make. If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve case 2023-6842 Windmill Hill at Las Placitas compound final subdivision plat.
Second,
Is there a second?
second,
I think Peter did it. Commissioner Smith did it.
Thank you. Commissioner Morondo,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
yes,
Commissioner Lucero.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll move to case number 2023-6655, 2200 Opecos Trail final subdivision plat. And I believe that Dan Esquivel is presenting on this.
Chair, I'm sorry, Chair Clow, let me see if I can identify him. You guys went through that pretty quickly.
Why this computer is bugging out. Maybe we can watch it between blinks. City Hall, yes. Get into City Hall, yes. He didn't. He, I guess, can you hear me? Okay. So, Madam Chair, members of the commission, this is case 2023-6655 Old Pecos Trail, final subdivision plat. Next. This is, again, it's 2200 Old Pecos Trail, final subdivision plat, Montoya Land Subdivision Consulting, Inc., agent for Pierre Amistory. Applicant requests final plat approval for a 25 lot residential subdivision with innovative street design. The property is zoned R3 and within the following overlay districts: South Central Highway Corridor and Suburban Archaeological Review District. Next. So this is the road of review that everybody has seen so many times. And with this, this identifies that the applicant has complied with all of the prerequisites to get to the planning commission. They've had a pre-application conference. They've met the ENN requirements. They've submitted their application. It's been submitted to the development review team. The development review team has analyzed it. The notice has been complied with per 1431H. DRT did produce final comments for the final plat. It was submitted to the legal department and to upper management for review and to finalize the report for not just content, but for the approval. And then it's appearing before you now. Next. Of the DRT members, there are 9 of the 17 members that had comments. Those comments are in your packet in one of the attachments. They've also been compiled either in conditions of approval or they've been continued forward as some of the technical corrections that are either going to be addressed prior to filing the plat, or those types of corrections have to be made during the construction phase. So those are what that happens there. Next. Before I get to this next section, and I know this was going to be a little hard to read because the text is so small, but I did break it down in future sheets here so that everybody can see what each one is. But out of all of these, 1437B7 or B4 final plat, the requirement for a final plat is that it has to conform with the preliminary plat, and the final plat shall conform substantially to the preliminary plat. In our review, the applicant has met the majority of the conditions that can be met that we required at this stage. The balance of the conditions will be met prior to filing the plat, and then other conditions that can only be done will be done at construction. So everything that this body saw at the preliminary plat is carried forward to the final plat. We did add a couple more conditions in order to further enhance health, safety, and welfare for that area. Like for instance, the fire marshal asked for additional parking along the main access road off of Old Pecos Trail. They did accommodate the fire marshal and added some parking area, widened that area so that in the event of somebody's party or something else and people are parking on the street, we can still get emergency vehicles through that road. Another condition was lighting. Dee Beingessner is here to discuss those issues relevant to streetlights. And I think for ADA, the land use director also required them to place a sidewalk along the driveway, the bordering the driveway access, and the applicant will be compliant with that, but that'll be done again prior to filing the plat. So as we get to the final plat criteria, this criteria is the same criteria that you saw preliminary plat. For the first criteria, in all subdivisions, due regard shall be shown for all natural features such as vegetation, watercourses, historic sites and structures, and similar community assets that, if preserved, will add attractiveness and value to the area or to Santa Fe. Again, this is just a repeat of what was at the preliminary plat. Per the archaeological clearance permit, there are no historical sites on the property, and that is referenced in attachment B of the DRT comments. The DRT has reviewed the application, determined that the subdivision shows due regard for vegetation, watercourses, historic sites, structures, and similar community assets in the area, including a trail connection. So these, again, there's no difference between here and what you saw at the preliminary plat. I don't know, I'm already swallowing it right now. Next. So this is 1437C2. The Planning Commission shall give due regard to the opinions of public agencies and shall not approve the plat if it determines that in the best interest of the public health, safety, or welfare, the land is not suitable for platting, and the development proposes of the kind proposed. Land subject to flooding and land deemed to be topographically unsuited for buildings or for other reasons inhabitable shall not be platted for residential occupancy, nor for other uses that may increase danger to health, safety, or welfare, or aggravate erosion or flood hazards. Such land shall be set aside within the plat for uses that will not be engaged by periodic or occasional inundation or produce unsatisfactory living conditions. Again, as with the preliminary plat, the platted lots of the subdivision do not lie within the 100-year flood zone that runs through the property. The applicant's proposed design has been reviewed by the DRT in conjunction with the city code. The findings of the DRT review identified that the proposed development would not endanger health, safety, or welfare, aggravate erosion, or flood hazard. So again, the final plat is in compliance, substantial compliance with the preliminary plat as it was reviewed by this body. Next, C3. All plats shall comply with the standards of Chapter 14, Article 9, Infrastructure Design Improvements and Dedication Standards. Again, the preliminary plat identified the location of existing and proposed roadways, improvements, and wet and dry utilities as is required for the preliminary plat. However, the application for final plat is required to comply with the relevant conditions of approval and technical corrections for final plat as part of the final plat review that will further satisfy this approval criteria. The proposed final subdivision plat complies with the standards of Chapter 14, Article 9, the infrastructure design. And again, we reviewed all of the conditions of approval by the Planning Commission. And for those conditions that were required to be implemented for final plat, the applicant has complied with that, including the open space standards, which we agree that the application does comply with the overlay requirements for open space per lot. Further enhancements to the open space will be handled per lot at the building permit phase, which is what we do with all open space for all applications for building permits. So that has satisfied our need in that condition as far as we are concerned. Next. Number 4. A plat shall not be approved that creates nonconformity or increases the extent or degree of the existing nonconformity with the provisions of chapter 14 unless a variance is approved concurrently with the plat. There were no variances requested for this plat. And there were no nonconformities that were created as part of the preliminary plat or that will be created as part of this final plat. Approval of the proposed subdivision would not create any nonconformity. Next. Number 5, recommendations actually. The planning commission should approve case 2023-6655, 2200 Old Pecos Trail final subdivision plat, subject to conditions of approval outlined in this report. Next, there's one sample motion that is required. Approve or deny case 2023-6655, request approval of final plat for a 25 lot residential subdivision approximately plus minus 9.59 acres. And I believe that will end this presentation. I'd like to provide just a little bit more understanding as to what an applicant has to endure in our office when running through the process. And I think there is one on this board that understands that more than us. But when we originally adopted the zoning code for the city of Santa Fe, this was it. This is what establishes when anything before this was adopted, it's legal non-conforming, or anything after this ordinance became compliant with city rules and regulations. So in those days, an applicant could easily file an application, read the minimal rules that were in place, and reasonably get approved without any problems, because there wasn't a lot of rules to deal with at that time. Today, this is chapter 14. And this is just one part of the city code. You still have the codes that the fire department has to deal with, the water department, the sewer department, traffic, all of the other departments that have to weigh in on an application that add to what an application has to be reviewed for and to go for. So in order for that to happen, there's no such thing as a complete application when it comes in. Nobody has ever brought me a complete application that I can say, this is perfect, let's go forward. There's always going to be conditions of approval so that we can bring them into these standards. And there's always going to be requirements that we're going to ask for during the review process, because either they weren't clear or they missed them entirely. And during that road of review, as you saw earlier, DRT is going to request additional information to force compliance with chapter 14. That is the only way an application can get through the process. By the end of that process, they are complete, because we force them to comply. And for those that don't want to comply, you have seen me up at this podium recommend denial. You've seen that a couple times. But for those that want to comply and they agree to the conditions, we recommend approval. But those conditions are vital to meeting the requirements of chapter 14, because those were agreements that we put in place with the applicant that will go ahead and do this, but you're going to submit these prior to recording the plat or prior to building permit. So they're not options. They're not negotiable. These are issues that we believe forces an application to comply. This application has gone through that process. The final plat is very similar to what you saw before this case. It's just the passing of that application in in a more complete format that substantially complies with the original approval granted by this body when they first saw the preliminary plat. So with that, that will end my presentation. I know that was long and this is pretty rough when you have to deal with this, but this is the way.
And Dan, I have one question and then I'll see if any of the other commissioners have any clarifying questions. And I know that as part of the approval, there was a stipulation by the developer that the units the residential units would only be 1 story. Is that on the plat?
The applicant did agree to those terms, and that's what they're proposing. Those conditions will be placed as notes on the plat so that rather than covenants that are enforced by a homeowners association, those would automatically be assessed by the staff at the time of building permit. They're either going to comply or they're just going to be corrected and they're going to have to go back and recorrect their application.
As I remember, we talked about that condition being on the plat so that the public knew that if they purchase one of these lots, it would only be they could only build 1 story. Is it on the plat? I've been looking and
No, we will make
and that
sure
needs to be,
that, again, some of these conditions, when we send it back, there's another round of DRT review. That round looks at the preliminary conditions, look at the additional final conditions, and we catalog every one of those conditions. And we make sure that everything is ready to record. All notes that are required to be notes, even if the applicant, even if we didn't say it was going to be a note, there are only so many ways that we can enforce a note or a condition, and that is to place it as a note on the plat. And that is so that when people in our office look at the building permit for review, they can read those notes and address those concerns accordingly. So,
I mean, I think that's an important note, not only for staff, but it's important for the public who would be buying the lots to know that the building is limited to 1 story. Because that was a major concession that was made by the applicant. I don't think they're going to have a problem with having it. They're shaking their heads. They don't have a problem. So we just need to remember tonight if when we're addressing this issue, that be required to be placed on the plat.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, all conditions that were approved by the commission at the preliminary plat and any condition adopted here, those will be cataloged. And when I run through the final plat review, all notes will be placed on there. And then every DRT member will also look at their conditions of approval and either place them as notes on the plat or force the application to update their drawing to meet those requirements.
Okay, I appreciate that. Do any of the other commissioners have questions of Mr. Esquivel?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
it's not a question, it's more of a clarification, just
yes.
on the point of a note being on the plat, it would be typical for those conditions not to be on it yet. So that would often happen once everything is signed.
Okay, that's fine.
Just offering that.
Yeah. Also, and just another point of clarification, there are some things that were a part of the preliminary plat that weren't included as part of the final plat because this commission has already approved them. Traffic has been approved. The conditions for fire have been approved except for the parking, which was added on there. Affordable housing was approved. Those are issues that are on there. All of the original hardcore reviews that brought all the team together to look at this were adopted and approved by the planning commission at that preliminary plat. So there was no point in bringing that forward. It's basically making sure that all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted to meet that code requirement that this body will approve this plat and it substantially complies with the preliminary plat, which it does. I would say it actually goes above and beyond with the additional conditions that have been placed on there by our terrain management and by the fire department.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Smith?
Well, Mr. Escobar, if you could just refresh my memory, and if this question is better for put to someone else, tell me who that would be when they come up. What is the range of affordable housing? As I remember, there's 7 units, and how do they range on the 30, 60, 90 on the different?
I would have to defer that to our affordable housing director.
And I believe she's available. There's 5 units, not 7, it's 5.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have those figures.
Would you like to have Alexander Ladd
I
give you
would.
that information at this point in time?
Yes.
Okay.
please.
I thought she was going to be here, but
Yeah. Chair Clow and Commissioner Smith, in her absence, and I do hate to speak for Alexander because she is the expert on this. But what I recall was there were 5 affordable lots, and they were broken down 2, 2, and 1. And so 2 were going to be, available at one rate, 2 were going to be at another rate, and 1 was going to be at another rate. And so, but I would hate to speculate, because I know there's those 3 tiers of affordability. Those that serve, the most, the most affordable, mid-range, and then closer to market rate. So that was going to be the breakdown.
and I think her absence is my fault. She asked me to text her when we were coming here, but I was having so much problems with my computer, I forgot.
Well, why don't you text her and then we can address this later.
Yeah, I can try to pull it up as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the applicant.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, my name is Carl Summer. My address is P O Box 2476, Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm here on behalf of the applicant, and I'm here with Orlin Guerrero Ortiz and Mr. Mike Gomez. He is our traffic engineer, and Ms. Guerrero Ortiz is our civil engineer. Our client is on the phone or on the YouTube, or whatever he's on Zoom. We agree with the conditions of approval. We agree with the staff report. We will put the note on the plat that we talked about, and those will all be taken care of. We have no objection to it getting on the plat. It would be, I'm informed by Ms. Guerrero Ortiz, note 11 on the front of that, because the last one ends at 10 right now. There probably is another clarifying note that needs to go on the plat, and that is a notification to the public regarding the 50% open space on each lot rule and how that works, so that when they buy, they know that they have a 50% rule. In your packets is a demonstration of the compliance with that. We would stand for any questions you have. We think this is pretty straightforward. It is one criteria. Does this substantially comply, or excuse me, substantially conform to the final plat? It does. The same number of lots, it's the same layout, it's the same streets, it's the same intensity, it's everything. Staff has added a few conditions that we have no objection to whatsoever. There is in your plat a 12-page presentation by Mr. Throne that raises some legal issues. If I could just reserve a few moments to address those after Mr. Throne or whoever speaks, then I would do that. But other than that, we'd stand for any questions you might have.
Any of the commissioners have questions of the applicant? If not, we'll move to public comment. So anyone from the public that would like to speak on this matter, please come forward.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Bruce Throne, 154 West Cedar Road. Yes. Bruce Throne, 154 West Cedar Road. Before I begin, I understood from Ms. Moore that commission per its prior practice would allow this ceding of time by other members present either in person or on Zoom. And I have a list of those people who want to cede their time to me so that I can address actually the considerable matters that were not addressed in the applicant's submissions or in staff's report. So I'm prepared to, before I begin, give you those names so you can confirm.
Okay, maybe we should wait for. Go ahead. Okay, Jason will handle it. And I just want to state, I mean, it's a much better way to present because rather than hearing the same thing over and over, it's really nice to hear one sort of solid presentation. It's much more helpful. So
Yeah.
proceeding that way is great.
Thank you. Wish the governing bodies thought the same way. So let me just give you, before I start and my time starts, I'm gonna give you the names and then I'll go first with people that I told me they were going to be here in person. So you'll have to confirm that, I guess. Do you want them to stand or? Okay. Elena Sparrow. Lily O'Leary. Christopher Werlin. Steve Clark. Annie Campbell. Nina Doherty. I'm sorry. Donna Ray Pace. Kathy Thomas. Jerry Wise. Yale, sorry. Yale Ray Walker. No. I'll check. Peter Ives. Paula Woolworth. Lucia Dykeman. Jens Dykeman. And is John Gibbs here? Okay. I don't know if there's anybody else that it wasn't on. I don't have that. Those would be the in-person people, and then we can go to the Zoom people when you're ready, sir. Oh, sure, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. And just tell me when you're ready for me to give you the names for Zoom. Go ahead, sir. Thank you. Jeff Atwell. Tell me when you want me to go on. Since I don't see the Zoom.
I see him on there.
Yeah, thank you. Mark Baker. Okay. Bob Joseph. Yes. Okay. Sally Covington. Tom Hall.
Tom Hall, if you're on Zoom, could you raise your hand so you get a pop to the top there? Okay, there we go. Tom Hall, thank you.
Thank you. Pat McDaniel. Charlie O'Leary.
Charlie, yep, check. Charles O'Leary.
Jane Cotton.
Let's see. Okay, Jane, yep, correct, okay.
Helen Tomlin. Tomlin.
Sure, okay. Okay, Helen, if you're on Zoom, could you please raise your hand? Okay, did anybody else see that name on it? Helen. Helen. Don't see Helen, I'm sorry.
Okay. And Steve Farber.
I see Steve Farber, yep.
Is John Pound, John Pound on?
I do see him here, yep.
Okay. That's all I have at this point, which I believe, if I'm counting correctly, is 26 people.
Madam Chair, I'm counting 24. That's
At 25.
48 minutes. Okay.
Split the-
Sorry. Close there too.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and start and we'll see. I mean,
Okay, I mean, I'm hoping.
I don't know if you can talk that long.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the commission. My name, as I said, as I testified before, I'm a 47-year resident of Santa Fe. I adopt as part of my sworn testimony tonight, all of my prior written comments, including the 12 pages of written comments that were submitted on July 3rd. There's also in your packet that was added late. I was added at my request, a request for an opportunity to question witnesses for the staff and the applicant in this case that I submitted on May 30th. Just for the record, I would object again to the parent decision by the commission to not address that and to simply not allow me to do that. So I just want to state that for the record. I also submitted additional comments that I've contacted city staff and Ms. Nook Amen, if I'm pronouncing your name right. I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. I've communicated with them that have not been included in your packet, and I wanted to alert you to that. Some of them were submitted on PrimeGov, and some were submitted to staff when there was no PrimeGov public comment button available to submit comments. And I don't think that was proper. One of the problems on the PrimeGov comments was apparently there's an extra step that people have to use in order to, after they submit their comments and hit the submit button, there were directions sent to me by Ms. Moore, 10 steps on step-by-step. Here's how you do it to make sure I knew how to do it. I sent that out to other folks. But the last step listed was on number 10 was after you upload your document, either by typing it in or attaching the document, you hit submit and then it's uploaded. But apparently, and then the screen changes. And that's what I did on all of my comments. And then apparently there was another step that wasn't explained in her directions. Now, when I did complain about my July 3rd comments not being included in your packet originally when they was first posted, I did contact the staff and they did agree to put those in, but there's others that aren't. So that's a problem. It's also a problem for others. I was contacted by other people, including Ms. Diane McIntyre, who had two comments that were not included. Same problem. I've seen the correspondence forwarded to me between her and also some correspondence between Ms. Pat Lillis and the staff and the city attorney's office explaining this was a problem. And the response that I reviewed in the email was that staff did not know what other comments had been submitted in that manner and hadn't gotten through because they couldn't figure out what they were. So this is a problem. We've asked for it to be corrected, and it really was compounded in this case by another procedure that happened. And before I get to the substantive comments, I want to mention that. And that is as early as May, when the first notice of this case came up, I requested on behalf of a number of residents and myself, copies of the submission by the applicant so that we could review that and comment. I mean, there's no point in having public comment in a case like this if you can't comment on the submissions by the applicant and ultimately on the staff's report. And I asked for that in two different contacts with staff, copied to the city attorney's office. And basically the answer I got back was, we're not going to do that until the Friday before, the week before your hearing. And those were not actually posted until after 3:15 PM last Friday, which meant, I don't know how you spent your 4th of July weekend, but I had to spend it Saturday, all of Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, reading all the materials and then preparing comments and getting what I could get in by the 5 PM deadline on Monday. This is not appropriate. It's not transparent. It's not fair under quasi judicial principles that are applied here. And I just like to bring that to your attention for that reason. I know I'm not the only one who's asked for this. Other folks, I think Ms. Lillis and Ms. McIntyre, have contacted the city through staff because we couldn't contact you directly, and made the point that until that public comment process on PrimeGov is corrected and made clear to the public, and you reopen that public comment period, in this case, to allow a reasonable period for additional public comments, we don't think it's appropriate for you to engage in the decision-making process in this case. That being said, let me turn to really the main points that I made in those 12 pages. And I hope you'll read those comments. I mean, they weren't posted till yesterday. And I want to say that when I attended your July 21st, 2022 hearing, one of the first things, Madam Chair, you stated was that you assured everybody in attendance that all the members of the commission read all the comments that are submitted before you engage in your decision-making process. Unfortunately, and with respect, we know that's not correct. And the reason I want to tell you why we know that is because, as you may know, there is now a pending appeal of the city's rezoning decision for this applicant in front of the district court. And one of the things that came up in preliminary motions there was the fact that I submitted comments to you on August 6th of 2022, after your first hearing on July 21st, before your August 18th hearing where you voted, which the chair and the city allowed me to submit, with comments about what was addressed or not addressed by the applicant and by staff at the first July 21st hearing. We discovered during the appeal that those comments had not been properly scanned into the record for the commission or the governing body. And when the appellant's counsel raised that matter with the city attorney's office, as your assistant city attorney here knows, because I've seen her emails on this, they acknowledged that a legible copy of those comments were not submitted to you and were not submitted to. And so, we would presume that if you actually read those comments and you saw there was an illegible copy, you would have at least said to staff, can you give us the legible copy? That never happened. Now that's a matter that's now going to be before the district court. I'm not going to address it further here, but it does raise concerns here about, how much you're really going to look at these public comments as opposed to just simply accept and, conclusions that are in staff's report. Now, second point I would like to make, it's actually the first point of my comments, is I think even though it was not addressed in staff's report, that we have this pending appeal, the rezoning decision, and also the city ordinance 2023-1 that's referenced in staff's report that codified that decision. I think all the members of the commission understand that the applicant's preliminary plat and final plat were contingent on approval of the rezoning from R1 to R3. And so that has to be lawful. And so now that if that appeal is pending, I would submit to you that this body cannot approve a final plat unless it's expressly conditioned upon the city and the applicant receiving what's known as a final non-appealable order from either the district court, or if it goes to a higher court, one of the appellate courts in New Mexico, declaring that that the city's rezoning decision on January 21st of this year and the rezoning ordinance were lawful. That is not addressed at all in the staff's report. Second thing I want to mention is this new condition that Mr. Escabel very briefly glossed over, the lighting. I actually raised this in one of my comments, whether or not there was going to be any lighting, street lighting required for the subdivision. Very important issue for the neighborhood. Sally Lomas, as prior comments addressed, has no street lighting. And it's one of the things that contributes towards the rural feel and rural character of that area that is actually expressly recognized in the general plan. When I raised that issue, there was no response from the applicant, except to say there might be something, but there was no plan. And then there was nothing from staff. To come in now, the 11th hour, and do this before there's public comment is not appropriate. It's not proper. It also violates, principles of procedural due process. That will definitely change the character of the area, and that was relevant to one of the criteria that you were required to address in the rezoning case. Now, we're not here to talk about the rezoning case, but for them to come in now and to add that is really beyond the pale. So we don't think you can approve that condition now, and we think this is going to be certainly an appealable issue if this is what occurs at this juncture. And I would also point out that your condition, that was never addressed, but in your findings of fact and conclusions of law in last year's case, which is 2022-5064. Now turning to the really important issue of the applicant's compliance with the 50% on each lot open space requirement. And that is particularly important because not only is the subject property located within the South Central Highway Corridor Protection District, where that requirement applies, but also lies within the Old Pecos Trail Scenic Corridor, which is implementation policy in the 1999 general plan. That's policy 3-I-9 that, of course, we addressed in the prior hearing. And so compliance at this juncture is very important with that open space requirement. And as I submitted in my comments, we don't believe the applicant has satisfied its burden of proof showing compliance with that requirement. And we don't think staff's report, which simply agrees with the applicant, shows you that compliance either. Now, procedurally, well, let me back up. As I mentioned in my comments, 23 years ago, when the former owners of this property, the Wursts, came in with a proposed subdivision to this body, at the preliminary plat approval stage, I participated in that case. They did not satisfy, and they could not satisfy the 50% open space requirement. It was in effect then. As a result of that, this body recommended at the preliminary plat approval stage that the council at that time not approve the subdivision. And after that happened, before the matter could be heard by the governing body, the Wursts withdrew their application. As you will recall, back at your hearing on July 21st, when this issue came up, the chair raised the question, well, when do we address that 50% open space requirement? And Mr. Escabel, after addressing the chair, and by the way, wasn't sworn in that case, wasn't sworn in this case, a violation of quasi-judicial principles, basically indicated that, well, that's up to you. And the chair, I looked at the video again to confirm my notes. And the chair decided without any discussion by the commission or any vote that we'll just defer this to final plat approval stage. So now we're here. So that procedure was a deviation from prior commission practice. Now, and the other thing that was very odd was that if you look at your findings of fact and conclusions of law, you actually found in that case, that last case, that the open space requirement, I'll just quote it, says, the lots within the subdivision will contain 50% open space in compliance with 14-5.5A South Central Highway Corridor Protection District. There was no finding at that point, no evidence at that point there was compliance, but that's what you found. And your conclusions of law in items number 3 and 4 of your conclusions of law concluded that the applicant met the applicable submittable requirements and, quote, the preliminary subdivision plat should be approved because all applicable code requirements and criteria for preliminary subdivision plat approval have been met, end quote. There was no evidence in that case that it supported those findings and conclusions. But we're here. So since we're here, let's talk about what was submitted on April 10. Now, even though I asked in May, I asked in June to get a copy of the applicant submission, so we'd have time to look at it. And as I think Commissioner Smith pointed out, you know, you get these digitized versions of the plats and you can't read them. So what you have to do on your computer is you have to enlarge them, and then you have to kind of scroll around, see if you can find the notes and these kind of things. So I had to spend hours doing that. I hope you spent hours doing that, but I wonder if you did, because it's not easy. And I think Commissioner Smith pointed out, it's not the easiest thing to try to understand what's in there or not. But I did it. And once you look at that, what do we find? Well, we find that even though all this was submitted on April 10th, there is a formula now that they're relying on. This oversimplified formula, which I believe is unreasonable. Their formula is, quote, lot square foot times 50% equals open space. And then they submitted a building setback, buildable area, lot open space document, which is attachment H. It's item 4 in staff's report that staff simply copies onto its report on page 7 of its report is figure 4. And they say, well, that satisfies the requirement. Well, it doesn't. I mean, if you really understand how the open space requirements work, all they did is draw boxes with 50% of the square footage of the lot and say, well, that's your open space. But that isn't how open space works. And I'll get to this in a minute, because when Commissioner Smith very wisely asked Mr. Escabel to address how the 50% open space requirement applies to this project, he gave some very incorrect and confusing answers. And I want to address that, because there are specific standards in Chapter 14. And I quote those in my comments. And one of the things that's really important here is that there's a provision in the code that says that it's not just the owner of the lot that is responsible for showing compliance with all Chapter 14 standards, including the open space. It's also the developer. What's happening here is the developer is trying to get off the hook, pass the buck down to the next owners of the lots by getting your approval and then passing it down to the building permit stage, over which this commission has no jurisdiction. You don't review it, the public doesn't review it. So enforcement of this has to occur at this level. You can't kick the can down the road again and just say, okay, after all the public review and city review is over, except for permit stage, that's when we're going to really find out whether they're going to comply. Now, what do the standards say? The standards in the code say not just covered buildings can't be in the open space requirements. You also have garages can't be in the open space requirement. You can't include driveways. You can't include parking areas. You can't include stormwater ponding. Now, stormwater ponding is interesting here because per the notes on one of the notes that was included on the PAT, and you heard, by the way, Mr. Summer acknowledge that the plat didn't even do what the letter from Ms. Montoya on April 10th said. Oh, we're putting a note on the plat that's going to notify folks of this open space requirement. You hadn't done it yet. Oh, we'll do this later. Everything's later. Everything's pushed down the road. But this stormwater ponding thing is very important. because the note on the plat confirms what staff required. It's because the drainage is so bad in that area. You should have seen it the other day after that storm we had last week. Every single lot has to have, not only have a stormwater pond to address impermeable surfaces that they build as they come in and build them, but maintain them, which is an obligation that not only all the market owners are going to have to comply with, all the affordable owners are going to have to comply with. That can't be counted as open space, and their diagrams don't reflect all this. Now, I assume most of you either own a home or are familiar with how home buyers or buyers of lots get informed about restrictions. Okay. You heard tonight, oh, we're not going to put the 50% requirement in the covenants and restrictions. And by the way, two things that were supplied to you via staff on April 10th was the draft affordable housing agreement. They didn't publish that in the packet, so we've never seen that, and that's important. And the second one is the proposed covenants and restrictions. Now we hear tonight, we wanted to see, well, are some of these things going to be enforceable? I mean, when you buy a house, if you're savvy or you have a good real estate agent, what you look at is you ask for the covenants and restrictions. Typically, people, even builders don't look at subdivision plats. They look at the property itself. So this is not going to adequately inform people of these restrictions, particularly the applicable standards. Now, that formula doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it. It doesn't comply, doesn't satisfy their burden of proof in this case on that issue. And I want to mention also that in that earlier hearing, Commissioner Smith asked the August 18th hearing, asked Mr. Escobar to explain more clearly how that open space requirement would apply to this project. And I reviewed the YouTube recording of this to make sure that I have these quotes right. Mr. Escobar's responses in that regard are worth your reviewing before you engage in your decision-making regarding this application. For example, he asserted incorrectly that, quote, the size of the open space is based on the square footage of the dwelling unit, end quote. And quote, ponding areas don't require additional open space. It's only based on roofed areas. Well, ponding areas don't require additional open space. They can't be included as open space. I mean, I listened to that last summer and I went, what is he talking about? But now you're having to look at this issue more closely. Another thing, a really wise question that Commissioner Smith asked was, I'll quote, would it have been reasonable to surmise that if standards for this Old Pecos Trail corridor had been developed, the open space requirements within that corridor would have been addressed? And if you look at that recording of what happened, Mr. Escobar couldn't answer that question. He couldn't answer it precisely because the governing body had never implemented those standards. They had never addressed the matter. And so now we have this very problematic, confusing situation going on where you're being told, just assume that it's all going to be taken care of down the line after your jurisdiction and authority ends in this case. Not appropriate. And we don't think you have the information now to give final plat approval to this based on the information you've been provided. Let me also add something about the affordable housing part. You may recall that the 5 affordable houses the applicant really made a very big point that this was going to be a significant benefit to the community. Well, to find out if it's going to be a benefit, one of the things that it's reasonable for you to know is, well, what is the affordable housing agreement? For instance, where are those 4 to 5 units? Are they going to be along the flood zone? That is the Foothills Arroyo? Because if it's along the Foothills Arroyo, one of the notes on the plat points out that for sure those people are going to all have to get flood insurance. And I don't know if the last time you've all checked your home insurance rates and flood insurance rates, but they're very expensive. So this is now an added cost. And even if they're not going to be there, they're going to be on other lots, they may also, I mean, I live on a hill further down the road. And I was asked, whether I should prove that I'm not near a floodplain. And I had to do that, so I didn't have to pay for flood insurance. These are important things for you to understand. And where those lots are. So do you know where those lots are? You don't. We asked for that information in the ENN meetings. The applicant's representatives declined to identify. We asked for that information when they filed for their preliminary plat approval. They didn't identify. And here we are now, and you have a draft, supposedly was submitted on April 10th, a draft affordable housing agreement, and you haven't shared, that wasn't provided by staff in the packet for you, and it wasn't for us. How can we comment? How can you have really meaningful comment? And the definition, the legal definition of procedural due process in a quasi judicial case is an opportunity to be heard at a meaningful time in a meaningful manner. Staff's procedures here, withholding this information last Friday, and then this truncated comment period ending at 5 p.m. on a holiday weekend on Monday, and then having this very troubling, problematic Prime Gov process. You combine all those things, and it's turned this into, frankly, a charade. It puts you in a captive position where all you can do sitting up there is rubber stamp what they have, unless you're willing to dig into this more. And so that's what we're asking for you to do. We want you, if you're going to, you're volunteers. I respect that. You don't get paid. Believe me, I don't get paid either to do all this work. I've been doing the staff's work here. These are things that should be brought to your attention by the staff in its report, that you can then decide and ask intelligent questions. If they don't put it in the report, you can't even ask the question. So to conclude, we really would respectfully ask you to withhold your decision in this case. Ask the staff to correct the Prime Gov public comment process and procedure so it's clear. Open the public comment process for a reasonable period of time to allow public comments on what has been filed here. And only then go ahead and proceed to deliberate and make a decision on this. Because otherwise, we think it's so procedurally flawed that frankly, we think there's the only recourse that the community has in cases like this is to appeal. I'm, having practiced law for 45 years, I'm not a fan of litigation. But if it's the only option you're going to give the community, when the city's land use department runs procedures like this that are procedurally unfair to the public, it's our only recourse. That's what has to happen. So thank you for listening to my testimony. And if I have, how much time do I have left?
A lot.
I would just ask as a courtesy, because, trying to manage this in a way.
That's fine. You can come back.
I do have a problem with, Mr. Summer getting rebuttal time. I mean, they've already had a lot of time in the former case, in this case, but you're the chair, so you make decisions in that regard. But I know Ms. Lillis.
He can't address issues that haven't been raised, so.
Um,
And they are the applicant, so I think it's probably appropriate. But I just wanted to make a comment. When you said that I said that I was sure that everyone on the commission had reviewed your materials, I was pretty sure that everyone had. I had, and they were voluminous, and I read all of them, just like this 12-page memo that I have marked up. But I think what you don't understand is that staff, when submissions come in after the report comes out on Friday, staff sends us those submissions by email. So I received your 12-page memo by email after you filed it. And then on the other one, I'm sure that the same thing happened, is that we received them all by email. So that we're not necessarily having to go back in and look at what's been submitted, because it's coming to us by email. But we do go back in and look.
Madam Chair, just from the public perspective, the only way we know if any comment has been submitted after we hit the submit button, is we have to wait per staff's procedure until after the closure of the public comment period and go back in onto Prime Gov, look into the packet and see whether it's been added. When I did that on Tuesday, I saw, oh, my comments weren't in there. Now, I was alerted, I was lucky, Ms. Lillis on Monday night said, did you see the second page and the second next button? And I said, no, where's that? That's not in the instructions that Ms. Moore gave me. And when I found out, I emailed that night, I emailed staff, even though it was the holiday weekend, saying, hey, you know, now I don't know. So I never know how you get it. But I also assume that you get things like maps, plats in the same digitized format that I do. They're not providing you with the large maps that you can read all these things. And that's a problem. I mean, the note on the plat, there's a note on the site plan about this. Site plan isn't what people are going to look at when they buy property. You know, I saw, you know, Commissioner Miranda, I think, shaking his head when I was talking about how people find out. I mean, I practiced real estate law for a while as well as other law, and I know exactly what people look at and don't look at. And the last thing that this community wants is a situation which we've seen many times before, where the city approves something, like the first interstate building years ago, and they have all these conditions, and then the builders come in and they put in whatever they like, and nobody remembers and nobody's there. I mean, how is it someone in the building permit division going to even know about all this stuff? Is Mr. Escabel going to be there 2 years from now when these things are built? Or is he going to be, you know, like Ms. Montoya and Ms. Guerrero Ortiz? They just move on to the, you know, work for them. I mean, they may be out and it's a revolving door between the staff and the developers. So this is not fanciful. I'm not making up stuff that every competent real estate lawyer and real estate agent understands in terms of how you notify people. And then we have a situation where they've said no variances. Well, what's going to happen? They're going to come in and all of a sudden they go, what? I can't do this. I can't do that. They'll come in for variances. We won't be around then. We won't get notice of those proceedings. So, I mean, I really hope you'll take this seriously and not just shake this off as somebody coming in and making this stuff up. I mean, I spent a lot of time researching this issue, and I wish this had been better addressed in staff's report, but it wasn't. If I have any time left over, I'd like to give it to Ms. Lillis because I think she has a couple of things.
Well, I have a question. You said that there are some people that tried to submit comments and they weren't able to. Are they here to present to be able to talk tonight so that we can hear what they have to say?
Here's
Or
what
have you covered it? Because I want to make sure all the points that need to be made by everyone are made so that we have all the information we need, because the more information we have, the better decisions we can make.
I agree. But here, Madam Chair and members of the commission, here's the problem. The person that I was contacted, Diane McIntyre. I'm sorry, McGinnis. McGinnis. Is she on Zoom? She's in a different time zone 2 hours later, and I got an email from her or a text from her 2 hours ago saying she'll try to stay up. And I know she's contacted the staff and the city attorney about, I think the staff is more about this problem. I don't know what was in her comments.
Okay, well, I believe that she's on, so maybe we'll hear from her next.
Okay. And
So that because of the 2-hour time change, she can then go to bed.
Okay. And then the other thing I want to just point out is that we don't know, and you don't know, and the staff doesn't know how many other people submitted comments thought you got, only to find out that they hadn't gone to that extra step, wasn't in the directions that Ms. Moore had written directions. And I have them, a copy, but I can't hand them out to you because I'm not allowed to hand out written materials that you're hearing. But so you don't know. And so the answer is you don't know if there are other people that submitted comments, and that's why I think you have to reopen the comment period. But thank you for the opportunity to address this.
Should we go to the Zoom comment? Maggie, can we do that?
Yes, sure.
Yes, but I think we're going to do Zoom so that,
Okay. Ms. McInnes, on Zoom, I have
Hi,
allowed you
can you hear me?
yourself. We can, please. Yeah, state your
Thank
name.
you.
Address for the record.
Diane McInnes, 110 Calle Paisano, Santa Fe, New Mexico, 87505.
Hi, I'm going to go ahead and swear you in. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, yes, I sent 2 comments in and none of them were accepted. And I wrote saying I didn't get any kind of acknowledgement that these were accepted. And Maggie said, oh, you had to do it by 5 p.m. Well, I did it way before that, both of them. And one was May 26th when we were going to have the June
ask-
meeting.
we
And-
understand the issues that you guys are raising, but
Okay.
so I can move past that.
And- Okay.
It's your your substantive comments.
Okay, I will say that I'd like to know if you received them. You received, when I sent them to Maggie and said, please forward these because they did not go through the portal for some reason. I asked that they be sent on. I understand Bruce has been sent on. Did you receive my comments?
Could you go ahead and talk about your substantive issue, please?
Did you receive my comments? Yes or no? That's all I need. And then I will go on. The obvious answer is no. So she did not do as she should have if she had integrity. I'm very concerned about this project. I'm concerned about the lighting, especially because it significantly affects the character of the adjoining neighborhood. It's a rural, historic neighborhood designated by the city. And lighting is not appropriate in this area at all. There's no need for it. IDA says there's no need under 20, I think under 35 miles per hour in any case. And I object to it being added at the last minute. It was not in the preliminary plat. I'm concerned about all of the issues that Bruce mentioned. And I think that the Planning Commission has not received information. Either did the governing body, because the same thing happened with the governing body. A lot of comments over the last 2 years have disappeared. They were somehow misfiled when we used to send them by email. And I'm very, very concerned about this continuing lack of proper procedure. And I'm very concerned that we in quasi-judicial proceedings can't even discuss not the land use, but these procedures that are not appropriate and prevent the public from making comment or the Planning Commission or the governing body of having enough information to make a decision. So I do not think it was appropriate to have this meeting without those things in place. And I object to this development mostly, and I particularly object to the procedures that we're going under. It's the hearing is premature pending the appeal of the city's approval of the applicant's rezoning application. And I'm concerned about the open space. It's clearly needs to be defined before anything is approved. I agree with everything that Bruce said. And I know I'm rushing, but I'd like all of the comments that I sent in to be included as part of the packet. I want them part of the public record. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me? Are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Do you have any questions?
Do you have any additional comments that you made in your submittal that you haven't made at this point in time?
I'm so upset because of this. I actually do not know, but you can just say that I agree with every point made by Bruce Throne.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on.
I'm going to go ahead and swear you in.
Oh,
Hi, do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Kenneth Jacks, 716 East Zia, Santa Fe, 87505. I actually have here my paper signed by Celia Craig Kimball. Are you here? Ms. Kimball makes the point that the exits of the property having to exit onto Old Pecos Trail, traffic must turn right, travel southward on Old Pecos Trail, make a U-turn about 3/4 of a mile down and then come back. He proposes a paper here, which you may already have, but I have her plan for the development, which has the exit onto West Zia, and all traffic has a traffic light to go north or south. And I would like to, if it's appropriate, pass this to someone so that it can be reviewed.
We can take it and make it part of the record. Maggie?
Her point is briefly in this, that it's quite dangerous to have to go down, crossing 2 lanes of traffic, get into a left turn lane, and then make a U-turn to come back. When if you eliminate the access egress from Old Pecos Trail and make it only on West Zia to solve all these problems, it makes a lot of sense to me. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Ann Peterson and my address is 116 Calle Enlace, 87505. I've written 2 op-eds for the New Mexican, published in 2022 about the proposed OPT development, which should have been shared with you guys, and I'm not going to recap them here. With all due respect, my concerns tonight have to do with the approval process, which to my mind has been imprecise and lacking in transparency. We should not even be considering a final plat approval until the legal appeal process of the rezoning has run its course. Items such as street lighting have been added at the last minute. Concerns regarding increased traffic, drainage, and the wildlife corridor have been elided. Building aesthetics have largely been ignored, and I have no idea what the proposed development will look like. The legal requirement of 50% open space in every lot has been interpreted every which way, and on and on and on. The process has been unnecessarily adversarial. Those of us with legitimate concerns have been stonewalled and discounted. It has sadly occurred to me that in Santa Fe, regulations and ordinances are followed when they are innocuous and broken or disregarded when they are seen as inconvenient or obstructive. Lip service has been paid to preservation of the OPT corridor and the character of adjacent neighborhoods by the city, but the impression is unavoidable. These are empty words. We are here tonight because we care about our city and neighborhood. The Planning Commission should, in a word, plan. It should not be a rubber stamp for development and disregard its own rules. Accordingly, I urge denial of approval. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Pat Lillis, 2119 Conejo Drive. First of all, I'm the person that helped Bruce discover that, well, I guess I discovered that the submission on the portal is incorrect, flawed, all of the above. I knew that about this probably a year ago when I was submitting the first set of my comments to the Planning Commission. And I noticed that the second time I went to submit, I came across the name to submit my name. And I hadn't done that before. I thought, boy, isn't that strange that you can do this without a name? I thought, okay, my comments were anonymous. So I discovered, anyway, I have 2 sets of documents and I'd like to give them to you if possible I don't know how it.
You can
One
give
is,
them-
I took screenshots on Monday of the portal, the submission, comment submission portal. And I have by hand, I put in the errors. Halfway through, it says submit. That's not, and then you think you're done. It's incorrect. It should say next. And I have it all. It's a very easy fix. And I think it's been this way for quite some time. And I'm sure that's a problem that nobody wants to acknowledge, but it should be fixed because it prevents people from going through the whole process. So the first submit, if you don't know better, you will leave. And if you do know better, you know to continue until, and then it says next, and then there's a last submit. And that's when you put your name in. I've got it all documented. It's as right as rain. There's no question about it. And I'd be happy to meet with anybody and explain it, but it's pretty much all here. So I think I made 4 copies each of these if.
You can go ahead and
interested.
give them to Melissa.
I was looking around. All right, so don't know if I need to explain further about the portal, but it doesn't work. So what happens is we only have, I believe, 3 venues with this quasi judicial system. We can enter our comments through the portal and they can be extensive and you as commissioners can read them. We can talk for 2 minutes or more if we get people to cede time. And then what else do we have? I'm not sure what else we have. Anyway, it's a limited situation. We don't get to discuss or explain or address any of these types of issues. What I would really like to begin by thanking you for your time to hear this case. And I ask that you deny this final plat. It is not complete. And there has been a lack in public participation availability. And as you've heard, this proposed subdivision and rezoning is currently on appeal. So I'm not quite sure what the rush is. It'll probably be on appeal for several months. So it seems to me that a few things could change. One is why I don't understand why there aren't covenants that go with this. For instance, why there aren't covenants that say, okay, you can't build anything that would go against the 50% open space. This is very important, and it's in the it's an ordinance for the South Central Highway corridor that 50% open space is required because it is a corridor. That's why there's a 75-foot setback. And that's why I believe the zoning should never have been changed or approved by the governing body to go to R3. Covenants would spell out and cement these things. 50% open space is one. Short-term rental restrictions. It's my feeling that the only reason this subdivision has ever been approved is because it has affordable housing. Affordable housing is most affected by short-term rentals. If you have short-term rentals, you take away affordable and workforce housing. There's no denying it. That's the way it is. Is that for me?
Yes, if you could keep going, but
Okay.
please try to be brief and wrap up.
I think there's some people also that will give me their time. Also, Height restrictions obviously need to be part of these covenants and restrictions, and they should be on paper, and then not notes that will get lost someday. Let's see what else. How about flood insurance? Has anybody discussed flood insurance? Will anybody purchasing these lots, will they require flood insurance? That could be a problem, especially for affordable housing. How about stormwater ponds? Which lots will have stormwater ponds? We'll need them. I think the ingress and egress on West Zia is horrific. And will there be a gigantic speed bump to slow people down because of that very dangerous curve? These are just a few of the, short-term rental open space. Some lots are very, very small. And hopefully they will comply with the 50% open space. ADUs are allowed throughout the city, and I don't think there's anything to change that. However, it should also be specified that if you have an ADU or want to build an ADU, it will not violate the 50% open space. I guess finally, I'd just like to say that there were quite a few things left out of the staff's report in the very beginning. They only submitted half of what was talked about in the 1999 general plan. The second protection was never submitted by land use, and it might be because of what it says. I don't know, but I'm going to read it. It's really short. Under implementing policies, adopt an Old Pecos Trail scenic corridor designation and development standards for the Old Pecos Trail between Cordova Road and I-25. Implement is the key. And it was left out of every document that I've seen so far.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up, please.
Okay. And I guess that's it. Please deny, if not just for the improper procedures that have taken on the portal, and also because we need more specific information from this developer. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair Clow, if I could just briefly address the issue of the handouts. It's my understanding that the commission typically does not take handouts from the public or in general. It would be your choice to accept them if you wanted to, but I wanted to make sure that we were okay with processing them. And
I think we're okay with letting them be part of the record. I don't think it's a problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Adam Johnson, 121 Arroyo Hondo Trail, 87508. Good evening, Commissioners, Madam Chair. Thank you for your service to the community as always. I want to talk a little bit about rules. Boards run on rules, right? Chapter 14, as Mr. Esquivel held up, is very thick. And you're supposed to follow the rules that are printed within that. And, you know, an applicant is granted due process when they engage with the land use department. They follow a certain set of rules, which are ensured by the land use staff. And the public is supposed to have some process laid out for them to participate in these in land use cases, especially ones that have exceptions or variances, which are in fact a request to bend the rules. So the residents' complaints, which you've heard it, I won't repeat them, which center around the bottleneck of the public comments on this online portal, are flawed because there is not a sort of secondary recourse or a trapdoor or a way to communicate those with a quasi-judicial body. And the land use policy is that you cannot email these comments to that body. So contrary to the thinking of some in the neighborhood, I don't believe this is an obfuscation attempt in a direct way, even though I understand why the residents of this community have reason to believe that. It's not, so far as I know, Ms. Moore's or her staff's malintent. As a city employee, she and Mr. Esquivel are supposed to follow the rules and processes, and we are supposed to ensure that they do. The problem is that the procedural rules are not balanced. This flawed digital system has stymied public comment many, many times, not just in land use cases. Members of the Charter Commission are online and in the audience. I commented not once, not twice, but 3 times to that body, and they were not received directly through this portal. Ironically, I was commenting about fair and balanced land use practices. And in that case, I was able to email them, and they were able to be received by the commission, although not in a timely way. They couldn't study them in advance. I had to speak them into the record as I'm doing with my public comments today. So, you know, I'm an observer of city processes and a participant in many different boards and commissions, and I see this across boards. So I don't want to sort of lay blame in one department. I think that the city policy overall prevents public participation, and you're seeing this directly today in a way that is just coming to a head. I think that if we rely on digital systems and rules for participation, such as a 2-minute timekeeper, right? They need to work. This must be taken seriously by this body and by all of the city. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Anyone else here in present who hasn't spoken, wants to speak? And then Dan, we're going to move to Zoom next. Maggie, is there anyone on Zoom who did not give away their time, wants to speak? I see one hand. Well, it was raised. Now it's down.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Cloud. Just to be clear to those folks who are joining us on Zoom, if you did not cede your time to Bruce Throne earlier and you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Dan. Okay, Dan. Okay, and Charles O'Leary, we have you down that you ceded your time to Mr. Throne.
Charles O'Leary did.
Right, but Dan Kay,
Dan Kay did not.
I will allow you to talk, Dan. You can unmute yourself. Please state your name for the record and be sworn in before you give your testimony.
My name is Dan Kittrell. I'm at 689 Calle Espejo in Santa Fe.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I thought the testimony tonight was compelling. I don't need to repeat all of it, but the lingering concern I have is with the old Pecos Trail Scenic Corridor. A lot of that information got lost. Staff didn't follow through and implement it. My concern is been laid out here in a number of different ways, that notes on a plat are not effective, that either covenants or some other formal way of documenting what's been agreed to through this process is absolutely critical. And I agree that since this is still being litigated, there's no reason to move forward with a final approval, especially given all the other issues that have been raised this evening. So I would encourage the commission to deny the request for this evening and postpone the formal review until a later meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Sheila Brown, I've allowed you to unmute yourself. Please state your name and be sworn in for the record. Thank you.
Hello, this is Sheila Brown. I live at 760 Calle Espejo. I had intended to cede my time to Bruce Throne, but was unable to get on earlier, so I just wanted to add my voice.
Yeah. I'll need to swear you in. Do
Oh,
you
I'm sorry.
Sure. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say that I want to add my voice to the community that's so concerned with the destruction of the Santa Fe corridor, Old Pecos Trail corridor. I really plead with the commission to reconsider this and go back and do proper procedures and really consider whether this is the best decision for Santa Fe and its future. I've lived here for 40 years, and of course, we've all seen a lot of building and changes, but to destroy our last scenic corridor into the city just seems to be untenable. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So Chair Clow, I do see Charles O'Leary, but we do have him down on the list of people who ceded time.
Yes.
And I have that Bruce Stern has 17 minutes left. So if he wanted to go down to 15, we could let Mr. O'Leary speak, I guess. Does that sound appropriate?
Yeah, Mr. Throne is saying that's fine. So
Okay,
let's
great.
go ahead and
Well-
hear from Mr. O'Leary.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Charles O'Leary, please state your name for the record and be sworn in before you give your testimony. Thank you.
My name's Charles O'Leary. I'm at 2307 Calle Halcon, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. And thank you for giving me a little bit of time here. I did just want to point out a couple of things. One being the issue of covenants. It seemed as though in prior meetings, there was the promise, if you will, by the developer to put in covenants. I just wondered, do we know if that's going to happen or not at this point? So I have that question. Also, the lighting is a big issue. And again, coming in at the last hour and talking about some issue and putting it in that's so affects our neighborhood is really of concern. And then I also wanted to just say that we understand that the process is really, from what we understand, is really about helping the developer go through the application, looking at a strong application, making sure everything is done. There's very little from city staff that supports the neighborhood. And so I just wanted to bring that up. That I think that you all, as commissioners and the governing body, are really the ones who can speak to the character of the neighborhoods. When we talk more about our concerns, we're labeled as NIMBYs, we're labeled as anti-affordable housing, which is very wrong. So I just want to say, I hope you consider the city as well, or the neighborhood. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom?
Thank you, Chair Clow. Yes, if anyone is on Zoom that would like to participate in the public comment portion of the hearing tonight, please raise your hand and we will be calling on you. If not,
No one else?
I don't see anything at this time.
Mr. Throne, did you have some additional comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I did get a text just now from Steve Farber. I think he's got it, says he has his hands raised. I know.
I was figuring we're going to hear that.
But so if you can check on that, while it was just a couple of points that
But Mr. Farber gave you his time.
he did, but I haven't used.
Okay,
So if you can
so
afford him that courtesy.
we can let Mr. Farber talk.
He
I do
can
have-
raise his hand. It's not raised, so we didn't.
Can you, if his hand's not raised?
There we go.
bring him
Okay,
up?
great.
Okay,
So we will take Mr. Throne's balance down to 13 minutes,
okay.
and we will allow Mr. Stephen Farber 2 minutes. Please state your name for the record and be sworn in before you give your testimony. Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Farber, F-A-R-B-E-R. P.O. Box 2473. I live on Botoff Road. I've been a resident of Santa Fe, New Mexico since 1974.
Mr. Farber, I will go ahead and swear you in. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
First, I would like to say that I have raised this issue with the governing body, which I don't know whether they read it or not, but I find it somewhat ironic that we are all sworn to tell the truth, yet I've gotten information from the city clerk that no members of any boards or commissions of the city of Santa Fe, including the Planning Commission, have ever taken an oath of office. Under the New Mexico Constitution, Section 21, I believe it is, it requires anyone who's appointed to public office to take an oath of office before they can assume the duties of that office. There's also a state statute that parallels that constitutional provision, if I have remembered and cited it correctly. I'd also like to have, as a part of the record, correspondence that I submitted today to Ms. Moore. I do disagree with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Johnson. I do think that there is an effort on the part of the Land Use Department through Mr. Cluck, the director, through Ms. Moore, through Mr. Esquivel, to stifle public comment on developments that people have concerns with. This is one of them. The Botoff Road is another one. The Candlelight Neighborhood Association, which is still on appeal. And I'd like to suggest that appeal has been going on for 1.5 years. So I'd like to have my comments that I submitted to Ms. Moore today be made a part of the record, objecting to the portal. I attempted on March the 2nd to raise this issue with you, but the portal was not working. Now, I know Janet Clow, and I know her brilliance. And I know that she can probably read things backwards, but I doubt that there are very many people other than her who could do that. And all of the comments that I submitted were backwards, and it parallels the experience that people have had today with regard to this particular project, attempting to get input to the planning commissioners. There is a procedure in place that stifles public input. It violates the processes of a fair and appropriate quasi-judicial process. As Mr. Throne said, opponents, parties are entitled to be heard in a meaningful manner and in a meaningful way. That is bedrock law. And I am very concerned as a former city councilor, as a lawyer for 50 years. I just retired from my practice at the end of 2022. I sort of think I know how a process and a procedure that is fair, fundamentally fair to all of the parties who are involved should operate. And I must respectfully state that I do not think that the city's processes, of which you are a part, not that you created, but of which you are a part, is fundamentally flawed and denies to those people who wish to present opposing viewpoints contrary to the developers very little opportunity for input, denies to people the right to cross-examine witnesses. I find it ironic, again, that I have to take an oath of office to tell the truth, And members of boards and commissions don't have to take an office to faithfully follow the laws, which is what that New Mexico constitutional provision and state statute states. I was involved with the Old Pecos Trail between 1992 and 1996 when I was on the city council. A fundamental principle was that although it was widened, that area was going to be seen and preserved as a very special entryway into the city of Santa Fe. And I have listened to your proceedings. I do not understand how, with the changes that are being recommended by the developer, you keep and maintain the essence of Santa Fe. We know St. Francis Drive has gotten ruined by all of the apartment houses that have been built without provisions for proper screening or proper landscaping. One doesn't even have to think about Cerrillos Road and what happened, other than perhaps to thank us because I was on the council that voted to limit the size of signs. Otherwise, we would have Anywhere USA on Cerrillos Road, which is as ugly as can be. So I just wanted to make these observations that I hope that you will carefully think about the various points that Bruce has made. He has spent hundreds of hours since he stopped actively practicing law, going into detail to show that this project is fundamentally flawed, and those who oppose it have been fundamentally denied the right of input throughout this process. For the planning department to have received the information in April and not provided it to people who they know wanted to review it is, to me, a dereliction of duty, and I think intentional. And I've experienced that in my opposition to the Botolph Road rezoning, which this planning commission approved, I think, without proper consideration and proper balancing. Balancing is a very important part of the rezoning provisions of the city code, and its strict adherence to the rules and regulations of the Chapter 14 also is very important. And Janet and members of, Ms. Clow, Chair, and members of the Planning Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Mr. Throne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There were a couple of points.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, there are other people? Okay. There's one other?
Yes, Chair Clow, a hand was raised, Blanca Amador's surgeon. I will allow you to talk. Please state your name for the record and please be sworn in before you give your 2-minute testimony. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Blanca Amador Surgeon, and I live in 2315 Calle Halcon.
Thank you. Do you swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your service to the community. One comment that I wanted to add is that in the decision of the city council, I was really shocked by one comment made by one of the councilors that said, you know, I will never approve development that's coming for our R1 in the city, never again. And it's like that, to me, that was irresponsible. And he seems very biased to make a comment like that, you know, and it makes this project then biased for everyone, right? Because they're not considering the beauty of Santa Fe and leaving the corridor, you know, available for nature. And so I like you to consider that, and the whole issue of affordable housing, or saying, you know, that people can afford these lots, or, you know, it's without the right information, I believe. So thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Maggie? No?
Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to give anyone else on Zoom who has not provided public comment, please raise your hand. And if you would like to speak at this time. Okay. I do not see any hands raised.
Mr. Throne?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of points that I skipped over earlier. There was another thing that I think it was Commissioner Smith. I'm not sure who asked it. What asked about, we were talking about the open space requirements in the last hearing. And Mr. Escabel was asked about accessory units, whether they're mother-in-law houses or guest houses, whatever. And I went back and looked at the video again to make sure my notes were right. And he said there was nothing, that the staff had no power under the code to prevent anybody on those lots from putting in an accessory unit in addition to their primary dwelling unit. Now, that I submit to you is incorrect. Because as you heard, I think earlier from Ms. Lillis, and she's right about that, and it's pointed out in my comments, if somebody comes in and says, I want to put an accessory dwelling unit on, and they can't do that and still comply with the 50% open space requirement, it's not allowed. So not only was that misinformation, but it's disturbing. It's disturbing because what it suggests is that if you go ahead and approve this subdivision without really clear notes on the plat and provisions in the covenants and restrictions that say this, it's not going to be enforced. And so, as I said in my comments, one of the things that if you do proceed to approve a plat at some point here, that there should be a note on the plat and covenants that state accessory structures is defined in chapter 14. The city's land use code will not be permitted on any lot if the square footage of such a structure, when considered with the square footage of other structures on the lot, violate the applicable 50% open space requirement on each lot. And this isn't rocket science. All you need to do, make it clear, not leaving it to down the line when you're not here, some of the staffers aren't here and we aren't there, or this lack of enforcement. And then people wake up and they want to know, how is this mess created, I should say. Lastly, I just want to point out one thing. It's not truly an issue before you now, but I just want to remind you of something else. And I have to say, I've been pretty disturbed about the information that was provided to you after I had a limited opportunity to address you at the earlier hearings. One of the things that you heard on the whole rezoning issue was because, according to Mr. Escabel, the illustrative future land use map, which is after all is supposed to only illustrate what is articulated in the general plan. General plan articulates that development, density and other development standards will be developed, codified for the old Pecos Trail Scenic Corridor. He said that basically no one could come in with less than an R3 to be consistent with the general plan, because there are requirements in the rezoning criteria that you have to show that you're consistent with all applicable provisions articulated in the general plan. And at the same time, and I think there was brief mention of to you, but then the governing body level, there was reference by both the applicant's representatives, Mr. Summer, and also by Mr. Escabel, to the plazas. R2 PUD. 2005, they said that was approved. So that's 6 years after the general plan. Well, how did that get approved without an amendment to the general plan? If you have to have a minimum of R3, how did that get approved? And the answer is that was not accurate. That is part of the flaw of what was represented to you, that the future land use map, which has been controlled totally by staff, modified by staff, including before your hearing, when staff took Mr. Escabel's direction, took the old Pecos Trail Scenic Corridor designation off the map, and after the hearing, put it back on the map but then did it in a different way. I mean, if the staff was to do what that map is supposed to do, which is illustrate what is articulated in general plan, should have been on that what should have been on that future land use map is, until the governing body implemented those standards, to be determined as provided in implementing policy 3-I-9 in the general plan. That's what was proper. That didn't happen. So now we're in this situation. And it's just snowballing now. And again, I think, and I agree with, with some people kept asking me, why is this happening now? And I think it was Assistant Attorney Patricia Figali said in an email, well, since there's no stay by the district court of the preliminary or of the subdivision process, the applicant could go ahead and file an application for you to hear. Well, technically that's true, even though they can't get final plat approval until they get the rezoning. But here's the issue. To do that, they had to file an application that satisfied all the requirements in the code. They didn't do that. The burden of proof is now. It's not down the line. It's not, as Mr. Escobar suggests, oh, we'll take care of this later after you give the approvals. If that's the way the law works and that's the way the process works, then why are we wasting your time here? Just turn it all over to staff and they'll just go ahead and take care of everything in due time under the cover of darkness. And this process is beyond the pale. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. And I'd like to proceed is one, I was going to ask the Assistant City Attorney, Rebecca, to comment on the fact, as I understand, there's been no stay. It could be requested, a stay and bond could be ordered, and that has not been requested. So is that correct? And then based on the fact there's no stay, is it appropriate for the commission to go ahead and proceed?
Thank you, Chair Clow. Yes, the appeal was filed under Rule 1-074, which does provide a mechanism for requesting a stay. The appellant may request a stay and a bond may be ordered by the court. In that matter, no stay has been requested. None has been ordered. So there is no stay in place. And yes, it is my understanding of the law that there is nothing to prohibit the development from moving forward. That is what is anticipated in the law.
And just for non-legal people, a stay would be basically requesting the court grant an order that says nothing can proceed until the case is finished. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and then Dan, I guess before we go to questions of the commission, could you address the issue of the lighting and the fact that it is being addressed at this stage, the issue of the 50% building, the way it's currently on the plat, and the issue of affordability?
Chair Clow, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We just want to make sure if we're going to close the
I'm
public
sorry.
hearing portion.
Yes.
Or the public comment portion, thank you.
That we do
of the
it.
evening that we do
Yes.
that. And then.
Okay, so we're now closing the public comment section because everyone who wanted to talk has been able to talk. Okay, sorry. So Dan, could you address the issues that were raised?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, I think for the first one, we probably want to go to the first question. It was raised earlier, which was the affordable housing issue, and Alexandra Ladd is here to answer and address those issues. And then I can go into a more detailed overview of open space, and then we can bring in Dee Beingessner, who is enforcing the lighting requirements, so that you can ask her those questions and how they're being required.
So Alexandra, do you know what the question was?
I do not.
You weren't here. So Commissioner Smith asked basically on the 5 affordable housing, how are they broken down in terms of pricing? And when you address that, could you also address that it's not arbitrary, but it's by code, I believe, or by statute?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, it is definitely not arbitrary. So we have a section of City Code, Chapter 26-1, that regulates the inclusionary zoning program for the city of Santa Fe, which requires for a home ownership project, which this is, that 20% of the homes have price restrictions on them and are set aside for income qualified home buyers. There are 3 tiers of affordability, which is also spelled out in the code. One is from 50 to 65% of the area median income. One tier is from 65 to 80% of the area median income, and the highest tier is from 80 to 100% of the area median income. The prices are set to be affordable within those ranges so that the home buyer is not paying more than a third of their monthly income for their mortgage, their monthly mortgage costs and other housing costs as well. So it should also incorporate any HOA fees or utilities.
And I believe that Commissioner Smith asked how those are broken out for this project.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, the way the ordinance is written, it's a 20% affordability requirement. There are 3 tiers. So we price 5% of the homes at in the most affordable tier, 5% in the highest tier, and then 10% in the middle tier. So that equates to 20% of affordability for 5 homes. That's not quite as elegant as it would be for 4 homes, where we'd have 1 home in the lowest tier, 2 homes in the middle tier, and 1 home in the highest tier. I believe in this project, what we will also do is distribute the homes according to the number of bedrooms. So the affordable units have to be proportionate to the market units. So if the market units are all 3 or 4 bedrooms, the affordables also need to be 3 and 4 bedrooms, so that we don't have somebody doing only 1 bedrooms for the affordables, for instance. So in this case, I believe we have them distributed across 3 and 4 bedroom ranges, and then across the 3 pricing ranges, with the majority being in the middle range.
Thank you. Any other questions of Alexandra? Commissioner Lucero.
Thank you, Chair Clow. Just a quick question on the affordable homes. Is it commonplace to know where these homes will be located at this stage in the process, or does that come later?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lucero, we don't finalize the agreement until after all of the entitlements are secured. So after the Planning Commission makes the final approvals, at that point in time, generally is when the developer is seeking also to apply for fee waivers. So for each affordable home, the building permit fees, the utility expansion charges, application fees, capital impact fees are all waived. So at that point in time, the developer needs to identify the lots that will be the affordable lots.
So at this point, we wouldn't know if an affordable home is within a floodplain or might require additional flood insurance. Is that my understanding?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Lucero, at this, it depends a little bit on the project. This is a smaller number of of lots that are affordable. So I believe that the developer has identified them on the lot, but any extra expenses cannot be passed on to the buyer. So either the developer is going to absorb those and create an extra retaining wall or whatever needs to happen. But we will not, the city does not allow those extra costs to be passed on to the buyer.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Alexandra.
Madam Chair, just to dispel the misinformation that was provided, there are no lots in the flood zone. Flood zone was completely removed out of the development area of the subdivision. So there will be no lots or houses built within the flood zone. That was approved as part of the preliminary plat that you saw months back. With regard to lighting, I think D is waiting to go ahead and explain the lighting condition. If Maggie will elevate her so that she can go, and then I'll go into the open space.
Thank you.
Chair Cloud, oh, D, great, okay, you're.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if I was supposed to speak yet. Commissioners and Chair, regarding the lighting, when I first started, oh, do I need to be
Sorry,
sworn in?
D. You were just, if you could speak a little louder or into the mic a little closer, sorry.
Okay, is that better?
A little bit.
Do I need to be sworn in?
No, you do not.
Regarding the lighting, when I first started this job, John Romero was in Public Works and he was requiring lighting on projects. So I wasn't reviewing the lighting when new developments came through. This project came through shortly after John left. And I didn't realize that nobody from Public Works was reviewing lighting. So it wasn't until this stage that I realized we needed to include lighting. The reason that we include lighting is that we get numerous complaints from residents after a development goes in with no lighting. And we have had several that John Romero decided not to have lighting, mainly because there wasn't funding to maintain the lighting in the city. And our normal procedure was to require lighting at intersections into a development, long stretches in a development with no lighting, and at dead ends. So this property should have, according to what our normal requirements are, we should have at least one light at each entrance to the development and one light at the internal intersection on the one section of the development that comes off of Old Pecos Trail. And we would also like to see a photometric plan on Old Pecos Trail, because you shouldn't have areas where you have a lot of light and then no light and then a lot of light. And there's a lot of light at the intersection of Zia and Old Pecos Trail. And this intersection is nearby, but not close enough for us to be able to say whether or not we're going to need two lights there. So I think that we'll get away with 3 to 5 lights for this subdivision. There are several nearby subdivisions that have lights, both at the entrances and inside the subdivisions around the subdivision. It's not just the one development that's the closest does not have lights, but it also is not paved road, not curb and gutter, and this development is. So that's why we're requiring lighting.
Any questions from the commission? Commissioner Morondo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any disclosure of color temperature with the lighting?
We don't have a lighting plan yet, but they will have to follow Public Works requirements for lighting, and those do exist, and they'll have to follow those.
Do you recall what the color temperature requirement is? I was trying to think of what it was.
I don't recall, but someone else might be able to. There's Mike with Public Works is here, and I'm just blanking on his last name right now. He is the new streets engineer, and he is more familiar with the Public Works requirements for lighting. He might be able to answer your question.
I mean, I guess my thought would be a possible concession to the neighborhood would be to require the color temperature of the light to be under 5,000 or something like that. Which
You're talking about 5,000 Kelvin?
Yeah. You know, I do think that has a big impact on a residential neighborhood. We're talking about a white or blue light, avoiding that and going with a light form.
Dee, can you comment on that? Is that doable, or is the other person here that? can
Chair
comment?
and Commissioner, the standards are supposed to apply across the board. I don't know what Public Works would require in order to change what's allowed. I also don't know if that would have any effect on the continuity of the lights that they have to stock. Yeah, that would be a Public Works question, but I'm not positive that can be answered tonight.
I know it's a recommendation that's been made inside the city in several areas, but I don't know how that intersects with Public Works.
Well, I think the commission could consider, if they want to make a recommendation that to city staff, that they consider
That would come up in
permitting.
permit
Yes.
anyhow, so it shouldn't be a condition, but it could be a recommendation.
Yeah, it could be a recommendation.
Yeah.
Any other questions of Pilar? Pilar,
Yeah, Commissioner.
Commissioner
Faulkner.
Faulkner, you have a question?
Yeah, so I have a question about the lighting. Is it possible to do like down lighting of some kind? I know in some cases, like sports fields and some communities, you can do down lighting that doesn't interrupt or interfere with the skyline. It's a gentler kind of lighting that's not quite as abrasive.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Morondo.
required to be
Right.
meet the night sky.
Yeah.
So it'll do that.
Yeah, Commissioner Faulkner, the city of Santa Fe has a night sky requirement ordinance that I think addresses that issue.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to get it on the record that was something that we would do as a city.
Any other questions of Dee? If not,
I can
thank-
also answer any floodplain questions if you have any.
Any floodplain questions from any of the commissioners? Okay, thank you, Dee. Mr. Esquivel?
Madam Chair, member of the commission, there are a couple of things I'd like to talk about. The first one is the low hanging fruit. That's the conditions of approval that we're obligated to enforce. So the difference between a covenant and a condition of approval, notes on the plat versus a covenant. The city of Santa Fe does not enforce covenants. What we do enforce are the conditions adopted by this body or the governing body, or any rule or regulation that we're obligated to follow within chapter 14. So to understand how the building permit process works is when when a subdivision comes in or legal lot of record, and they're required to submit that legal lot of record, and that plat comes in, there are notes on the plat that the staff, the zoning staff, and even terrain management, if there are terrain management ordinance requirements or fire requirements, each station that is charged to review that application is going to look for conditions of approval that are appropriate to their review. And we put those notes on the plat so that we can enforce them because we have to. It's not a choice when a condition of approval has been adopted. It's a requirement and it's mandatory for us to regulate it, enforce it, and make sure that that building permit goes out meeting those standards. We wouldn't do that if it's just merely in a covenant.
And covenants can be changed too. I mean, the community can go ahead and amend a covenant.
That's true.
So they're always changeable. So when it is a condition of approval on a plat, that is the law that has to be complied with.
That's right. Those
And-
conditions become immutable and on a document that we can look at regardless of how many staff come in, how many staff go out. Those conditions are immutable. They're on the plat. They're trained to look at those notes so that they can apply those notes to the building permit. And we do that. We have been doing that for decades. This isn't a process that we invented yesterday or the day before. We've been doing this for a very, very long time, day in, day out, 5 days a week. 12 months out of the year. That's just the way it works. Now, with regard to open space, there are three types of open space. And I have to thank Bruce because we really dove deep into what the overlay was trying to represent in terms of open space. So we sat down, we talked about it, and those three types are private open space, common open space, and then you have the ordinance, the overlay for Old Pecos for the South Central Highway Corridor, which just identifies open space. Now, for private open space, for any residential lot, there's a section in Chapter 14 that tells us how to calculate open space, how to place the open space, and how much what that open space has to do in terms of slope. So for an R3 district, for private open space, it's 50% of the gross floor area of that dwelling unit. So if you had a 2,000 square foot house, you're going to have 1,000 square feet of open space, and that open space is triggered by its lot coverage. The lot coverage, how many buildings, we calculate the roofed area, and when you hit 40% lot coverage, you're required to put in that open space. Now, that open space cannot have parking, cannot have any kind of development. In fact, it can't even have your drainage. That's the private open space. Private open space can be converted to common open space in the event where you have multiple dwelling units and it's a multifamily unit, and we calculate that open space, and they can combine that open space into an area where 50% of that open space has to be usable as common open space. That common open space is then placed into an HOA for maintenance, and that becomes the common open space. But the overlay we discovered, and this was after the meeting of the Planning Commission, we discovered that the open space for the overlay doesn't have the same restrictions associated with private or common open space. It's just open space. So when the applicant was providing open space with drainage areas in there, we automatically assumed it was private open space because they're on individual lots. That's not what the ordinance is really telling us. It's basically saying that it's just straight open space, and that doesn't preclude drainage systems for the subdivision. Each lot now must contain a total of 50% open space, which is almost the same as private open space, because when you're dealing with private open space and you're dealing with the requirements for a building permit, you get to that 40% and you have that 1,000 square feet of open space, you can build up to 50% of your property, right? And that's it. The maximum allowed lot coverage for a lot within an R3 district is 50%. In an R21 district, it's 55%. Those are the two that we deal with for residential use. So for this subdivision, they're going to have that 50% because it's automatically required and demanded by the overlay. For any kind of accessory dwelling that fits within that buildable area, they can have a guest house, they can have a garage, they can have a shed, they can have whatever accessory dwelling unit that Chapter 14 allows for a single family dwelling for a legal lot of record. We then take a look at the notes and conditions associated with any kind of approvals of the subdivision, because there are subdivisions with unique approvals, unique conditions that we have to adopt. And we adopt those conditions into the review process and make those site plans for those building permits comply. And if they don't, they get kicked back to the applicant so that the applicant can revise those plans, bring them back so that they get a permit. That's the process. So there's some misconceptions that were presented tonight to this body regarding open space, regarding other aspects of review. But again, the staff has been doing this diligently for a very, very long time before I've been here. I've been here 16 years, and it's almost the same process with the exception of code changes and maybe administration and policy changes as a direct result of new ordinances or changes to the ordinance. That's open space. I hope I've dispelled any question or answered those questions in terms of how open space is calculated.
Does any of the commissioners have any other questions of Mr. Esquivel or any other staff?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Is it who?
It's Commissioner
I-
Faulkner.
Sorry, okay, Commissioner Faulkner.
So Dan, is there, and this could go out to the attorney as well, is there anything exceptional that has happened? Has anything happened in this case that puts this specific case in an exceptional position by comparison to all the other cases, including access to the where you can leave your comments and the due process involved in that using the website? Is there anything that happened in this case in particular that was exceptional by comparison to other cases?
I guess I'm not really following what you mean by exceptional.
Well, were the community members treated differently in process than community members from other cases? Was there anything that staff did in this case that would set it apart from the standard of practice in other cases?
Not that I'm aware of. I think, as you heard many of the comments from the community, because there were some members that didn't understand this time what they understood the previous cases, because there were people who uploaded information into PrimeGov at the previous meetings for this case. And then I guess for this particular night, for this evening, that was lost somehow. And Maggie tried to put together a how-to list so that she'd be able to help them better understand the PrimeGov process. I guess there were a couple steps that didn't make it, but I guess that would be the only thing. We tried to help as much as we could as far as how we process every single application. We deviate from how we work every application across the board, from the subdivision you saw before this case to some of the subdivisions you've seen in Los Solares. All of them are exactly the same process point. They follow the same rules and regulations. They're just a different case planner who addresses that review. I guess the only thing special about this is the amount of opposition it had.
And Commissioner Faulkner, this is Rebecca Minna-Carmen from the City Attorney's Office. If I could just briefly address your question. The answer is no, there's nothing exceptional about the procedure that was used for this case.
So in this case, the community members of the old Pecos Trail area were given the same opportunities as any other community members in any other case. And whatever deficiencies the system has, it was equal to all parties in any cases.
That is correct.
I think that's all I have now, Madam Chair. I might have a couple of things a little bit later.
Thank you. Commissioner Lucero, you had some questions? No? Commissioner Smith, you said you had a question or a comment.
So it's funny, nothing's funny tonight, but when I was pointed to the commission, I asked an individual, what's it like? Whoops, it's on. What's it really like being on the planning commission? The individual said, well, on a good day, 40% of the people hate you. On an average day, 50% of the people hate you. And on a bad day, 60% of the people hate you. And I'm thinking I may be able to even get above that number tonight. First of all, I really want to thank Mr. Johnson for his comments about the staff. If there are problems with the platform, they'll get fixed, I'm sure. It doesn't mean it wasn't frustrating, but I think his assignment of responsibility and motive was appropriate, because this is a staff, in my experience, that works extraordinarily hard, works with high ethics, and is not in the business of deceiving people. I just felt necessary to say that. I think the other thing that is on my mind, beyond the specifics of lighting or open space or the traffic or the other issues that have been raised, what I'm confused about at this point is the confusion I have as to when enforcement happens and how it happens and that it happens. Because if, frankly, I can't be assured that there isn't something where the staff can change and then things are not done that were whether they were conditions of approval or whether they were notes on the plat. It's just all words to this recovering politician of little note with lay experience and no legal experience or regulatory experience. If there are notes on the plat or covenants, restrictions, conditions, whatever we call them, how do we know that they will be followed, or the developer or the builder, assuming that they may be different people or different entities, how do we know for sure that they will be done today? With all due respect, saying that the lighting is going to get figured out, I'd like to know what figuring out the lighting is, what the conclusion is. And I'm going to have a hard time. I support this development. That takes care of the other 50%. But I can't support making a decision when I don't know what the consequences are. And that they will be enforced.
Madam Chair, members of the commissioners, Commissioner Smith. When a project is, maybe for something like this, D is in a better place to actually explain the construction process through the, in terms of how the inspections work, how each portion of the development gets looked at, inspected, and it moves forward. But ultimately, for the building permit process, we use the plat for our benefit. And that is for the land use, the current planning zoning requirements, all the conditions that are put in place that affect the lot for construction of housing, or maybe even if it's a development plan, all those conditions are reviewed by a staff person in that division that's going to look specifically for those zoning conditions and implement them. It's not a matter of missing it. It's not a matter of not doing it. It's a fundamental required part of the review for that building permit. That's how we make sure the sidewalks are put in place and that the sidewalks meet ADA compliant and that they're out and inspected by an inspector who's qualified to inspect for that particular issue. For landscaping, where there's an individual who's not only going to look at it on the map, it's going to physically go out there and count the number of shrubs and bushes and trees that are actually being placed within a landscape area and make sure that the drip irrigation system is being put in according to the plans, so that the streets, so when the streets are built, that the subgrade and the compaction and the asphalt that are being put in place and the curb and gutter and the street trees along those roads, and then the sidewalks on top of that, are being built to the specs that were approved and adopted. All of these are a coordinated effort between many divisions, many departments that come together to form a team to ensure that every condition and every aspect of Chapter 14 is implemented, because there are many other areas of Chapter 14 or other areas of the city code that don't get put in as a condition. Sometimes, and we've been told several times, don't condition the code, because they're not asking for a variance, and the code itself doesn't need to be conditioned. It's a requirement unless they are asking for a variance. So just because it's not mentioned, there are many more requirements that have to go into a review for a project to be developed, or anything as simple as a house, a shed, or a major subdivision. And that's how we've been doing it for a very, very long time. The lighting is also one of those criteria that somebody within the streets department is going to make sure that it's following whatever ordinance was adopted by the governing body, because they have to. And those are the requirements, and that's the process of that review. I think Dee might be able to go into a little bit more detail as to how maybe the financial guarantee works together with that project, because every project is going to give an engineer's cost estimate. That engineer's cost estimate is going to include all of the infrastructure requirements that we have to look for. In the event the developer goes under and they're midway, we can put that out to bid and finish the subdivision. So you don't have something that's open and destroyed. So the financial guarantee takes care of that. And some developers use that and ask for drawdowns after every inspection and after every completion of that particular project. So it works from the ground up, utilities, both wet and dry, the grading, the drainage, the streets, the pads, and the vertical construction. All of that is coordinated as a team effort from all of the departments once this application starts moving forward.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. That there is not a way, and this passes tonight, that a builder or the developer can ask for a variance at some other point in the process.
That anybody can ask for a variance at any point in time. And that variance, if it's a development plan or subdivision, then this body has the authority to review that particular variance. So it would come back to you as to whether or not you are or aren't going to grant that variance. So if you were part of this subdivision and you're still on board, and a variance came in to, let's say, go to 2 stories, and there was a condition of approval on the plat that said you can only have 1 story, and we said no, you're limited to a single story on this lot. Well, I want to get a variance. Well, here's the process for a variance. And then we would bring that before this body, and it would be a public hearing for all to participate in, just like tonight is.
So
Except that, Dan, just to be clear, when it's a condition of approval and on the plat, an applicant could not come back and ask for a variance.
Yes, they can. You got to remember, anything within chapter 14 that the variance criteria applies to, including conditions of approval that are here, can be subject to a variance. A variance technically is something that is put into place in the event somebody is unable to achieve the same rights and privileges that everybody else has, given the rules and regulations for that area. So if the rules and regulations for this subdivision were single-family residence, single story, and they say, well, I want a 2-story, they do have the option of bringing it back before this body. And you do have the option of looking at the variance criteria and deciding whether or not you wish to approve it or deny it. But that doesn't mean they don't have the right to make an application.
Just for my general education, is it the case that if the developer was also the builder, that then all of this could be taken care of in one packet? But since the developer is going to create the lots, but then the lots are going to be sold individually, there'll be 25 instances where an individual builder or owner to be would be able to come back and ask for a variance?
That is a possibility, yes.
And I just want to interject here as well, because we have brought, several variances, in my short tenure here to you. And we often, recommend denial. The last, final subdivision plat that was just heard before the board this evening, or the prior one for Windmill Hill, they were seeking a variance to the lane width standards in chapter 14. We recommended denial. The planning commission approved that variance. So, staff sees the variance criteria as a very high bar to meet. And, therefore we generally recommend denial to variances, but it is the board's, the only thing you cannot request there's a few things you can't request variances to, but generally, heights and setbacks and open space and all these requirements, one property owner can come forward and recommend and request a variance. Of course, that is within their rights. You cannot request variances to density. That would be a rezoning. And you can't request a variance to any procedural rules. So you cannot request to forego an ENN or forego, other notice requirements or things of that nature. So I just wanted to clarify, but staff's position is generally that, and I have, told people I'm not even accepting your application for a variance because we're not accepting certain, variance requests. Like we get requests all the time for 8 feet walls. The city is not even considering moving forward with any requests for 8-foot walls, in residential lots. So we also stop certain ones from even going forward because the precedent, of even considering certain variances would, we don't even want to consider. Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Morondo.
I just thought it was, so Dan very eloquently talked about how putting something on a plat restricts it, but I think that does gloss over the other point that that's the only way to do it, really. So the idea of doing covenants legally, the city can't enforce. There's no mechanism for them to enforce it. I'm just here to tell you that it's just the truth. And, frankly, I actually this is just an anecdote. I had a case recently where there was a plat where there was covenants and then there was approved language on the plat. The covenants was not kept in force for various reasons. And so as the applicant, I would have abided by them, but I didn't have to, so I didn't. But I did everything that was on the plat because I had to. And that's what would happen here. They have no mechanism to enforce covenants. It's not legally what they can do. That's about setting up HOAs and other enforcements of, right, but that would have to be done. That would have to be done.
Jason.
Madam Chair, thank you. Apologize, Chair Miranda, were you done? Okay. So yeah, I think I need to say a few things regarding this issue. So I think everyone that's spoken from the Planning Commission and staff side is correct that we have no ability to enforce covenants, but we do have the ability, and we do on a regular basis enforce conditions on plats and development plans, et cetera. I'd like to say just anecdotally, there are master plans from 20 years ago that have literally dozens of conditions associated with them. And we go over them with a fine tooth comb when we have to, all the way from a permit tech to me, land use director. So I want to just point out that for those that don't understand, the land use department is code mandated to uphold the requirements of various codes, not just chapter 14, but definitely chapter 14, all sorts of, building codes. We have to, as Dan has pointed out, we have to ensure that, the DRT is, we work with them to make sure that they're looking at their section of the code and applying it correctly. We have a multitude of processes, probably hundreds of processes within land use department to ensure that these conditions are met. Again, from the entitlements process all the way through to the infrastructure completion policy. And building inspections. So, all of these plats, once they're approved by you all, they go through the DRT process, the back end, so to speak, DRT process that Dan mentioned earlier, where these plans go, the applicant and the individual DRT members have a process where they go through and make sure all the conditions are met. Once that happens, then, there's a financial guarantee that's put in place usually, and then there's the development plan, subdivision plan is recorded, and it's filed in the city plat room for reference. That filed, and we won't even look at a permit unless it has a filed copy of the development plan, not just recorded by the county. It has to be filed with the city in our plat room, and we keep those in perpetuity. We have thousands of them. Those have to be attached to the permit drawings for each one of these individual plans. And then we have a residential plans reviewer and a residential zoning reviewer that goes and looks at all these and makes sure they won't even look at a plan. They'll just reject it. They won't reject it. They'll apply, corrections required to a permit application. If it doesn't have this plat on the, basically the first page with all the conditions, they go through and verify those every time. So I just want to point out that there are, like I think Dan mentioned, there are these just multitude of processes that are built into land use. It's what we do day in and day out. And we hire qualified people and train them to understand these processes, and that's handed down through time. That we're doing the same thing now that was done, 20 years ago by all rights. We're mandated to follow that process, and we do so. So, yeah, I have to say we're also human. So everybody makes mistakes, and generally when we do make mistakes, there's somebody from the public that calls us out on it directly, or just gets curious about it. We go back and look at it and make sure the conditions were met. If they weren't, we, put a hold on the permit. We put a hold on entitlements until those conditions are met. That happens too. That happens all the time. Whenever some kind of irregularity is discovered, we stop the process. We don't let it go forward. And so we have also by code from the very beginning to the very end, and for the life of a project, we have enforcement capability. As long as a project exists in the city of Santa Fe city limits, we have jurisdiction to enforce Chapter 14 and other building codes. So I just wanted to make that really clear. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Faulkner.
So for the record, we are talking about how many units, Dan?
25.
So on Airport Road, we have approximately approved around 1,000 units, close to 1,000, definitely hundreds. I know some of the community members from the Old Pecos Trail community. I really respect many of them. To me, I would hope that we would see as a community that this group from Old Pecos has a choice. They can look at this as an affront to a visual amenity, or they can look at it as an opportunity to help their entire community by allowing 25 families to have a home. And that's the part that I struggle with as a commissioner, is that there's, as a city and as a community, we genuinely believe in affordable housing and equal opportunity for everyone, but it seems like some parts of the community are taking a heavier lift than the others. And so I would just urge the Old Pecos community to say their portion of making housing affordable is 25 units. And that's something they can give to the city and to give to their fellow community members. And that maybe if we looked at it through that lens, it could be community building rather than community dividing. That's all, Madam Chair.
Just so I can be clear based on what Jason said, I'll ask you. In the issues that have been raised today, lighting, open space related, will they be conditions of approval? There won't be notes. There won't be notes on the plat. But, and I'm still not sure. Well, I mean, I'm confused as to where they're going to show up. In, after we, whatever, if this proceeds.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Commissioner Smith, all required notes will be placed on the plat that are associated with the development of that subdivision so that we can monitor them, enforce them, and implement those conditions of approval. So if they're not on now, they will be on prior to the recording of that plat. Because that's how we prepare that plat. If this is approved, from here, when the applicant is ready to move forward, a signature list is developed for all of the DRT members to go back and revisit that plat to ensure that every condition that they imposed is included on this subdivision plat, on the plans, so that they can be enforced and implemented. That's how we've done it, well, for a very, very long time now. The conditions that when you guys see the conditions of approval, those conditions are what we use to place on the plat.
And Commissioner Smith, when you sign the plat as the secretary, you can make sure they're on there.
That is correct.
Okay, so any other questions? Any other comments? Are we ready for a motion? Commissioner Morondo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the matter of case 2023-6655, 2200 Old Pecos Trail final subdivision plat, I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Second.
Commissioner Lucero, seconded,
Does that include all staff conditions?
subject to
Yes.
all conditions.
Okay, Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero,
Yes.
Commissioner Morondo.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. Could we take a 5-minute recess before the other case?
Sure, if I can get IT out here, I just updated again, maybe it works this time. Let's see if we can get this up there now. It updated again, so I'm hoping the drivers update. Yeah. I can't tell. That's nuts, huh? I've never had to work so hard for it's still not working?
I'll do it right now.
Oh, but there it
I'll
is.
do it right now.
Is that mine? Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
mine.
That's good. That's really helpful.
Duplicate, really? All right. Okay. That's awesome. It only took several restarts.
Oh.
Okay, we'll be back in session and could I have the agenda back? Thank you. Okay, we'll call the next case, which is case number 2023-6844, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment. Okay. Okay, we're back in session, so we need quiet. Thank you. So the first case is 2023-6844, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Mountain Corridor to Community Commercial. Case number 2023-6846, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Low Density Residential to Community Commercial. Case number 2023-6845, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Medium Density Residential to Community Commercial. And case number 2023-6843, El Lucero Crossing rezoning from R3 to C2. Mr. Esquivel.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, you've already gone through the captions. There are 3 general plan amendments and 1 rezoning. The first general plan amendment, as you indicated, is case 2023-6844, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment. And there was an error in the caption, so I crossed it out, but it's actually Mountain Corridor to Community Commercial, Wilson and Company, agent for Santa Fe Office of Economic Development, and they are the applicant. They're requesting Planning Commission recommend the governing body approve a resolution to amend the designation on the future land use map from, and that's supposed to be Mountain Corridor, not very low density, to Community Commercial. The next case is 2023-6846, El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Low Density Residential to Community Commercial. Again, the same agent. The third General Plan Amendment is from Medium Density Residential to Community Commercial. All of these are on 30.55 acres. We did break it, the applicant did break down each area, but they're not lots, they're just an area. And then finally, the rezoning from residential R3 to C2, which is general commercial. And that's for the full 30+ acres. Again, we have the rotor review for an application like this. It doesn't get presented to all of the DRT members, but they made an application. It did go through the ENN process that was submitted to the staff. The staff did submit it to the development review team. The DRT did question the agent for any kind of information they may need. The applicant complied with the notice requirements for 14.3.1H. DRT final comments did come back. We created the memo. It did go through legal and our upper management, and it's being presented to you tonight. There are 6 of the 17 DRT members that looked at this case. Besides me, you have MPO, you have traffic, water, sewer, and fire. Now, this is another one. I had to put everything up here just to understand, but I do have it broken down in different slides. And this is to ensure that the applicant did comply with the general plan amendment requirements. And since the general plan criteria is the same for all 3 requests, I'm not going to go over each and every one of them. I'm just going to go over it once, but they apply to each and every case for the general plan amendment. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. I also want to express that SWAMP or SWAMP or SWCAMP both refer to the Southwest Santa Fe Area Community Master Plan, and they've just been interchanged within the report. you should just read the swamp, but one of the counselors did not like the identification as a swamp, so we now just say Southwest Santa Fe Area Community Master Plan. So for criterion 1, consistency with the growth projections for Santa Fe economic development goals as set forth in the comprehensive economic development plan for Santa Fe and existing land use conditions such as access and availability of infrastructure. The Southwest Santa Fe Area Community Master Plan projected 2.5 to 10 units per acre. Actual development ranges from 5 to 20 units per acre. The project's deviation responds to the growing community needs. The requested shift to a general commercial status aligns with other facets of the general plan. It not only accommodates the increased density, but also introduces much needed commercial land, allowing for services and for the expanding community, reflecting an adaptive response to changing local conditions. I think that's really important to understand that because there are no services in that area. What this does is it responds to those services by adding more commercial land for development to occur within that region. And staff finds that the application and request contains sufficient information to address criteria 1, which is 1432E1A, related to growth, economic development goals, and access and available of infrastructure. Criteria 2, consistency with other parts of the general plan. And again, staff agreed with the applicant's response. It's in the packet. As identified by the applicant's response, several policies support the need for supportive infill to provide both needed services and housing for the area. I think the applicant will go into their concept of what is planned for that area. For our review, we did find that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address criterion 2, 1432E1B. Criterion 3, the amendment does not. So these are issues that Planning Commission should not approve if it allows uses or a change that is significantly different from or inconsistent with the prevailing use and character in the area, or 2, affect an area of less than 2 acres except when adjusting boundaries between districts, or 3, benefit one or few landowners at the expense of surrounding owners or the general public. Now, this one was an interesting one because of the way the future land use map reads and the adoption of the Southwest Area Master Plan into the general plan. And as stated earlier in the report, recent residential development within the Southwest Area Master Plan, and particularly the River Corridor Plan area, has surpassed the densities that are targeted within that particular plan. While the Southwest Area Master Plan projected a range of 2.5 to 10 units per acre, actual development ranges from 5 to 20 units per acre. And those are referenced again in the memo, if you look at that figure 5. This deviation is likely due to, at least in part, to the growing community need for housing. The request to shift this property from residential to commercial is responsive to the intense residential development nearby and aligns with other facets of the general plan, as well as the need to provide close by commercial areas for convenient shopping and employment opportunities. So I think that this particular section of the general plan that is identifying whether or not there's been it's consistent with that area. It's consistent with that area today, but it isn't consistent with the general plan as it was originally adopted. But as you know, the general plan is in for amendments. We no longer have the extraterritorial zone, which is deeply rooted within the Southwest Area Master Plan. So there's been a lot of changes. We believe that the change from its residential characters to the commercial use would definitely benefit that area and region for services. Criterion 3, 1432E1C. The amendment does not affect an area of less than 2 acres, except when adjusting boundaries between districts. That property is over 30 acres plus. So that doesn't really apply to this because it does comply for a rezoning. And finally, benefit one or few landowners at the expense of the surrounding landowners or general public. And for this, a change from mountain corridor residential 1 dwelling unit per acre to 10 dwelling units per acre is the standard. The community commercial will allow for a zone change from R3 to C2 general commercial. If approved, We would allow approximately both multifamily and non-residential uses to develop on the property. This change does not benefit one or few landowners at the expense of the surrounding landowners or general public, but benefits the community at large. Staff found that this application did contain sufficient information to comply with criteria 3, which is 1432E1C. I might add that the mountain corridor, there isn't even a standard to regulate one house per 10 acres. Right now, we're already talking about, you know, the impacts of a density of one house per acre. We don't have a mechanism of applying one house per 10 acres, and it's not really a good idea in a city anyway, in a municipality. Criterion 4, 1432E1D. An amendment is not required to conform with subsection 1432EC if it promotes the general welfare or has other adequate public advantages or jurisdiction. Criterion 2, 1435ECB, which is the one I just read, all the rezoning requirements of chapter have been met. So staff agrees that the applicant, the increase in population density due to new high-density residential developments together with existing residential uses in the area increases the need for non-residential services to the area. Staff found that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to remove the requirement of subsection 1432E1C, which means that they don't really have to comply with that since they are in compliance with this particular section. Criterion 5, compliance with the extraterritorial zoning ordinance and extraterritorial plans. Again, the extraterritorial zone was abolished when we adopted the SPAZO and when the city, the county, and Los Solares got into that lawsuit, and we abolished the EZ. So this is not applicable. Criterion 6, contribution to a coordinated, adjusted, or harmonious development of Santa Fe that is in accordance with existing and future needs, best promotes health, safety, morals, order, convenience, prosperity, or the general welfare, as well as efficiency and economy in the process of development. Staff's review of the global submittal identifies that the change from residential to non-residential identifies that there is a need for services in the area. The change from mountain corridor to community commercial and from R3 to C2 provides an avenue to contribute to the coordinated, adjusted, and harmonious development of Santa Fe, which benefits the area impacted by the lack of services. The future land use map change allows for the rezoning from R3 to C2 district, which uses contribute to the future needs that promote convenience, prosperity, and the area contributing to the general welfare and efficiency and economy of the area. Staff finds that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address the merits of this subsection 1432E1F. Criteria 7, consideration of conformity with other city policies, including land use policies, ordinance, regulations, plans. Staff agrees that the applicant's response within many responses to the criteria of the general plan amendment, many policies have been noted that help promote the request for change. And in this particular section, if you go back to the memo, you'll understand that the applicant, they provided not just one or two like many applicants do, they provided many sections of the general plan that they are responding to, that they're in compliance with. While the request conflicts with the Southwest Santa Fe Community Area Master Plan original theme design, the proposal comports with the changes established by the deviation of existing development of the area, which is likely due, at least in part, to the growing community needs for housing. The request to shift this property from residential to commercial is responsive to the intense residential development's needs for complementary community serving commercial uses in the area and aligns with other facets of the general plan. Staff finds that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address requirements for subsection 1432E1G. Criteria 8, additional criteria for amendments to the land use policies. In addition to complying with the general criteria set forth in subsection 14.2.2.1, amendments to the land use policy section of the general plan shall be made only if evidence shows that the effect of the proposed change in land use is shown on the future land use map or the general plan will not have a negative impact on the surrounding properties. The proposed change in the land use must be related to the character of the surrounding area, or a provision must be made to separate the proposed change in use from adjacent properties by a setback, landscaping or other means, and findings must be made that A, the growth and economic projections contained within the general plan are erroneous or have changed. B, no responsible locations have been provided for certain land uses for which there is a demonstrated need. Or C, conditions affecting the location or land area requirements of proposed land use have changed. For example, the cost of land space requirements, consumer acceptance, market, or building technology. The applicant is not required to document compliance criteria, Nate, since the application does not amend any of the land use policies, so this doesn't apply. And we get into the change for rezoning. Criteria one or more of the following conditions exist. There was a mistake in the original zoning. 2, there has been a change in the surrounding area, altering the character of the neighborhoods to such an extent as to justify changing the rezoning. Or 3, a different use category is more advantageous to the community as articulated in the general plan or other adopted city plans. For 1, the staff finds that there are no mistakes in the general plan. 2, the staff agrees that the applicant's response changes in the surrounding area have deviated from those original, from the original vision. The immediate vicinity of the parcel includes a new apartment complex and the large El Camino Real Academy Elementary School complex. Both developments include large multi-story buildings that do not strictly adhere to the rural vision. This deviation is likely due to, at least in part, to the growing community needs for housing. The request to shift this property from residential to commercial is responsive to the intense residential development nearby and aligns with other facets of the general plan. In turn, may justify changing the zoning. 3, staff agrees with the applicant's response. Proposed C2 zoning would allow for greater opportunity and variety of benefits for the community than the current R3 zoning. The change to C2 provides advantageous to the community to develop much needed services in the area. Staff finds that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address criteria 1, 14.3.5C1. Criteria 2, all rezoning requirements, chapter 14 have been met. Staff agrees that the application provides all components to address the criteria for a rezoning request. Staff finds the application request does not address, that is an error. It does address criteria 2. That's it. Number 3, 14.3.5CC. The rezoning consistent with the applicable policies of the general plan, including future land use map. Again, staff agrees that many of the general plan themes and policies allow for the change from R3 to C2. The rezoning request satisfies all rezoning amendments and approval criteria. Staff finds that the application request addresses criteria 3, 14.3.5C1C. Criterion 4, the amount of land proposed for rezoning and the proposed use for the land is consistent with the city policies regarding the provisions of urban land sufficient to meet the amount, rate, and geographic location of the growth of the city. Staff agrees again with the applicant's response. The infill and the land proposed for rezoning is greater than 2 acres. Staff finds that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address criteria 4. And criteria 5, the existing and proposed infrastructure such as street systems, sewer, water lines, and public facilities such as fire stations and parks will be able to accommodate the impacts of the proposed development. As you know, we did send this out to the DRT, and staff agrees with the applicants, and the subject property can be served by existing roadways and water and public water and sewer infrastructure. Staff finds that the application on its merits contains sufficient information to address criteria 5, 14.3.5C. Number 6, Unless the proposed change is consistent with applicable general plan policies, the planning commission and the governing body shall not recommend or approve any rezoning, the practical effect of which is to allow uses or a change in character significant, different from or inconsistent with the prevailing use, the character of the area, affect an area of less than 2 acres unless adjusted boundaries between districts, benefit one or few landowners at the expense of the surrounding landowners or general public. Staff agrees with the applicant again. The prevailing use and character of the area are generally residential. The property is greater than 2 acres and non-residential uses allow for services that benefit the general public. The subject property can be served by existing roadways and public water and sewer infrastructure. Staff finds that the application request on its merits contains sufficient information to address criteria 6. Finally, our recommendation. The planning commission should recommend that the governing body approve case 2023-6844 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Mountain Corridor to Community Commercial. 2, approve case 2023-6846 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Low Density Residential to Community Commercial. 3, approve case 2023-6845 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Medium Density Residential to Community Commercial. And 4, approve case 2023-6843 El Lucero Crossing rezoning from R3 to C2. There are 4 motions that are required in the following order. Approve or deny case 2023-6844 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Mountain Corridor to Community Commercial. 2, approve or deny case 2023-6846 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Low Density to Community Commercial. 3, approve or deny case 2023-6845 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from Medium Density Residential to Community Commercial. And finally, approve or deny case 2023-6843 El Lucero Crossing rezoning from R3 to C2. Again, approval in this case means recommending or recommending denial to the governing body. And that will end my presentation.
Mr. Burke?
You swear under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Noah Burke, 2342 Santa Barbara Drive, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for having me. It's interesting to be on this side of the podium, but my name is Noah Burke and I'm with Wilson and Company. And I'm working here tonight on behalf of the city of Santa Fe. So the lead agency for this request for the general plan amendments and the rezoning requests is going to be the City of Santa Fe Economic Development Department. And with us tonight, we have Terry Lease, who's our asset development manager. We also have Johanna Nelson, who's the director of the Office of Economic Development, and Director Rich Brown, who's the community development director. And then I'm, like I said earlier, I'm Noah Burke and I'm with Wilson and Company. I'm the New Mexico planning manager. So I wanted to go over a little bit of the context of where this area is. So as you can see, if you didn't see it in your packet, this is a 30-acre site that's located directly on the southwest corner of 599 and South Meadows Road. And it's at the major intersection of South Meadows Road and 599. It's currently leased by the city of Santa Fe from the New Mexico State Land Office. And it's been so since 2015. And it's slated for the construction of a new fire station And the lease states that any development that occurs in the future on this will be for the purposes of economic development. The city has the right to sublease parcel to other entities that include business establishments. Right now, as the site looks, it's currently undeveloped. And there's currently a economic feasibility study that is being undertaken through the city also. A little bit more context. What does this kind of look like from a zoning perspective? Well, the site itself is zoned R3, but directly to the north is zoned R1, and to the south is R21 and R1. To the east is R3, and then the west is R1. So the Office of Economic Development goals for the El Lucero Crossing sites are to create an economic hub which generates economic opportunities and community services which meet the needs of and supports the Southwest area and the greater city residents. So the Office of Economic Development is pursuing the zoning change to C2, which is a general commercial. It allows for a wide variety of uses, which includes multifamily housing and non-residential uses. It also, because there are 3 future land use designations on the property, we can't go straight to rezoning. We actually have to do a general plan amendment. So there has to be 3 general plan amendments, as Dan explained in his presentation. The future land use classification that we're pursuing for the property is going to be community commercial. That would allow for the C2 zoning designation if and when it was approved. And the rezoning could proceed. I wanted to talk a little bit about some public engagement and input that was taken, that took place. Your typical development review process for applications doesn't normally go this extra distance, but we wanted to kind of see what the community thought. So we did go ahead and do some community engagement and get some input. So there was a virtual survey that was conducted between April 6th and May 7th. It was an online survey, but we also passed out hard copies to collect community feedback about the desired uses the community would like to see for the El Lucero crossing. The survey received 24 responses. That's not a lot, but we did try to reach as many folks as we could through different outlets, and we'll talk about that. 17 were in English and 8 were in Spanish. So it was a bilingual survey. The mailing that went out actually went farther than what an ENN would. We actually mailed out to 600 feet because this is such a large parcel, and there's the 599, there's South Meadows. There's actually no neighborhood associations that are registered with the city in the vicinity of the area within that 300 feet. So we tried to go farther out, 600 feet. And that generated approximately 597 addresses. And in these flyers that we sent out, we informed them about what was taking place, as well as what that kind of meant, what it meant to do a general plan amendment, what it meant to do a rezoning, and what was being proposed. And you can kind of see what these look like here. So some highlights from the surveys with combined responses. You can see here that we asked the question, what is the greatest need for the Southwest area? And we got a few responses back, but basically the greatest need came back to be that there's parks and open space, grocery stores, retail services, and of course, housing. No surprise there. And then what was the greatest economic development need in the Southwest area? Small businesses and small business support was identified as the greatest economic need in the Southwest area. And specifically in the food, innovation, outdoor recreation industry. And some other noteworthy results from the survey were that housing and civic uses were the second highest ranked need out there, and that specific uses with majority support include mixed use buildings, community centers, fire and police stations, which there is a fire station slated out here, and also educational institutions. Additionally, we did 3 focus groups. And we wanted to kind of identify some sectors of focus groups that we wanted to talk to about out this in areas. So, and all of this took place before the ENN. We went ahead and had a focus group on, our first focus group was on April 19th. It was from 5 to 7. Then our second one was on April 20th. That went from 12 in the noon to 2. And then the third was April 20th and from 5 to 7. And those ranged with nonprofit organizations, business community advocates, as well as neighborhood associations that we could try to find in the immediate vicinity and neighborhood advocates. And those were the different focus groups, and they were divided among the commonalities of the different disciplines. And then the ENN was held on April 25th from 5:30 to 7:30. And I wanted to go ahead and the next slide is going to be kind of over the application criteria. I think Dan covered that extensively, and I don't think, unless there's questions about our responses, that I want to go into too much detail about that because that was pretty much covered by Dan very well. So that concludes my presentation without the application criteria. And I stand for any questions. So thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioners.
Thank you. Commissioner Lucero.
Thank you, Chair Clow. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Sorry, I forgot your name. There seems to be a demonstrated need for this. I'm not debating that. I'm curious as to when you talk about public engagement, and I saw in the ENN notes a little bit, but what sort of communication have you had with Santa Fe Public Schools, noting that El Camino Real is bordering that property? I would think they're a stakeholder here, certainly. So I would wonder what communications have you had with them? And then kind of as a secondary question, I'm wondering, are there going to be limitations as to what sorts of businesses can exist in that property, given its proximity to that school?
Thank you, Commissioner Lucero, for that question. So we did try to engage the public schools. We engaged them. So there's kind of two tracks going on here. There's the economic feasibility study, which is separate from this rezoning and general plan amendment. They've been engaged through that, as well as they were notified through the mailing opportunities of what was taking place. If they had questions, they did not reach out to us in terms of if there were any concerns. There's no development proposed right now. They may change their mind once development is proposed for the property. And then the types of businesses that could locate here, I think that the city has ideas about types of uses and businesses that would locate here. Obviously, C2 is a wide range of uses, but for the purposes of economic development on state land, and for the purposes of the Office of Economic Development, I believe that there is more specific types of, you can drum it down to more like multifamily housing. There's an opportunity for that here because it's such a large parcel. Plus there's going to be a fire station that's already been approved on 5 acres of the site. I'm not sure if Director Nelson or Director Brown wants to answer any more of those questions.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Thank you for the time tonight. The vision of the crossing for economic development purposes is really a mixed use community benefit. So your question, Member Lucero, was what types of businesses would go in. So the original vision is to bring a manufacturing hub to the area. That adds an economic impact that includes jobs and jobs training. And on top of that, we bring multi-use housing and multi-level housing so that we could have workforce housing on site. So there's walkability at the same time. Additionally, because it's such a large tract of land, we are looking at a commercial food center. So there's some small, medium food businesses in the city and in the regional area that we are all considering. We've been talking also to a nonprofit food center as a way to build job training and create a commercial kitchen So there's a job training opportunity there on top of the fire station, which is one of the first things that was considered for the site. So we really look at it as a very mixed use location, looking at it as a manufacturing hub. There are three different categories: food, regular manufacturing, and bioscience. And then we look at the housing that comes in with workforce for job training and places to live. And then on top of that, there's the community benefit of the food desert that's there and adding a commercial food center on top of a nonprofit area for community benefit too.
Great, thank you. I love seeing, I mean, I know that it's just a proposal, that model, but seeing that grocery store obviously is, I like seeing that. I am concerned though about liquor licenses perhaps being close to school property.
Madam Chair, Member Lucero, that's a very good question. There's another property that's a corner of Airport and South Meadows. It's an opportunity zone, and we weren't able to develop it, or no one was able to develop it because of the liquor license issue, that proximity to schools. Currently, we are not anticipating a liquor store or liquor sales inside this small density commercial food center.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Someone want to make a motion?
Madam Chair,
4 motions.
were you going to call for a public hearing?
Oh, yes. There's no one here, but we'll call. They all left. Sorry. Anyone from the public would like to talk on this? Anyone on Zoom?
Chair Clow, thank you. I do not see any hands on Zoom. If anybody would like to give public comment on the El Lucero Crossing general plan amendments and rezoning case, please raise your hand. If not, I don't see any responses.
Okay, so we'll close the public hearing portion. Any other questions from commission or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Our motions, 4 motions.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to approve cases 2023-6655, 2200 Old Pecos Trail final subdivision plat, and case 20.
That's the wrong case.
Oh,
Don't reopen that one, please.
we're done with that one. All right, let me start over. All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve case 2023-6844 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment. Case 2023-68. Do we have to do this one by one?
So I think we can do it all at once. Is that okay? We'll do them individually.
It might,
Okay.
might be more clear. I'm sorry. Yeah, it might be more clear to do it
That's
that
fine.
way.
We should. That's how we always do it.
All right, so
I'll second it.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero?
yes.
Commissioner Miranda?
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
I'd like to make a motion to approve case 2023-6846 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from low density residential to community commercial.
Second.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero?
Yes.
Commissioner Miranda?
Yep.
Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Motion to approve case 2023-6845 El Lucero Crossing General Plan Amendment from medium density to residential to community commercial. Motion to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Lucero?
Yes.
Commissioner Miranda?
Yep.
Commissioner Lawrence?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Faulkner?
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
And motion to approve case 2023-6843 El Lucero Crossing rezoning from R3 to C2.
Second,
Commissioner Morondo,
Yes.
Commissioner Lawrence,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Faulkner,
Yes.
Commissioner Lucero.
Yes.
Motion has been approved.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll move to staff communications.
I don't believe we have any communications now. Thank you. Chair Clow.
Do you want to mention the September 15th meeting?
Oh.
That would be good, I think.
Okay, yeah. So thank you. We did speak about that today, didn't we? So yes, planning commission members, we were looking at having a meeting of the planning commission in September. I believe it's the 21st, the Thursday. So that would be, normally we meet the first Thursday of the month. The 21st is reserved for an additional meeting that month. And we were looking at having a public hearing on the code update. And we will have Clarion here in Santa Fe. This is the plan. Our intention is to hold a public hearing at the Southside Library that week, and then have another hearing here at City Hall. And so we would do it, in front of you all and present the status, of that update and next steps. So, yeah. Okay, good. Hopefully you guys will, I'll be around to attend that one. Okay.
Any other staff communications? If not, matters from the commission? The commissioners have
Any questions?
Madam Chair, I'd like to report on the policy subcommittee. So we worked with staff. I think we're making some good strides towards getting the mediation process set up. Right now we have a working document and kind of a process that staff is reviewing, and they're going to get it back to us. And then we hopefully can finalize the document and have something for approval by the planning commission in the near future.
That sounds good. Thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Smith?
make sure that Commissioner Pava gets that message about the 21st of September.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Any other communications? If not, we'll close the meeting. Thank you.